Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. I never thought I'd end up as a park ranger, especially not in one of the most remote corners of the country. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was the summer of 1997 and I had just turned 3. My life in Seattle had imploded spectacularly. A failed marriage, a soul-crushing job at a tech company, and a growing sense that I was wasting my life staring at computer screens and attending pointless meetings. I needed an escape, and Olympic National Park seemed like the perfect place to hit the reset button. The irony wasn't lost on me. Trading the concrete jungle for an actual one sounded like the plot of a bad movie. But as I drove my beat-up Ford through the winding roads leading to the park, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The towering trees and misty mountains promised solitude and a chance to reconnect with something real. My first day at the ranger station was a blur of introductions and orientations. My new colleagues were a mixed bunch. Some fresh-faced kids straight out of college, and others who looked like they'd been born in the forest. One of them, an old-timer named Hank, caught my attention. He had a weathered face that spoke of decades in the wilderness and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "Welcome to Olympic City, boy," Hank said with a wry smile. "Hope you're ready for some real adventure." I laughed it off, thinking he was just pulling my leg. Little did I know how prophetic those words would turn out to be. As the weeks passed, I settled into my new routine. My work was physical but satisfying. I spent my days maintaining trails, assisting lost hikers, and occasionally dealing with the local wildlife. The quiet of the forest was a balm to my frayed nerves, and I found myself sleeping better than I had in years. But there was something about the park that nagged at me. And sometimes when I was deep in the backcountry, I'd feel a prickle on the back of my neck as if someone or something was watching me. I'd turn around, half expecting to see a curious deer or maybe a bear. But there was never anything there, just the endless green of the forest and the distant cry of an eagle. It was during one of these moments, about 2 months into my new job, that Hank found me staring into the trees, my hand unconsciously reaching for the radio at my belt. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked, his voice low. I turned to him, surprised. "Feel what?" Hank's eyes scanned the forest before settling back on me. "This place, it's got secrets, old secrets, the kind that don't like being disturbed." I chuckled nervously, trying to shake off the chill that had settled in my bone. "Come on, Hank, don't tell me you believe in ghost stories." His face remained serious. "There are things in these woods that defy explanation, kid. Things that have been here long before us and will be here long after we're gone. Just keep your wits about you, especially in the deep forest." With that cryptic warning, he trudged off down the trail, leaving me to wonder what exactly I had gotten myself into. Little did I know that in just a few short weeks I'd be face to face with one of those secrets. Fighting for my life in the very wilderness I had thought would be my sanctuary. Days grew shorter as summer faded into fall. The tourists thinned out, leaving the park to those of us who called it home and the hardier campers who didn't mind a bit of chill in the air. I had grown to love the rhythm of life here. The early mornings filled with birdsong, the long hikes through terrain that never ceased to amaze me, and the quiet evenings spent around the campfire with my fellow rangers. But Hank's warning lingered in the back of my mind. I found myself paying closer attention to the stories shared around those campfires, tales of hikers gone missing, of strange sounds in the night that couldn't be attributed to any known animal, of ancient Native American legends about spirits that guarded the deepest parts of the forest. I tried to rationalize it all. Every wilderness area had its share of mysteries and local legends. It was probably just the isolation playing tricks on people's minds. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. One crisp October morning, I was assigned to check on a family that had failed to return from a camping trip. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence. People often underestimated the vastness of the park or the challenges of the terrain. Usually it ended with a simple rescue, maybe a sprained ankle or a case of getting turned around on the trails. As I loaded up my Jeep with supplies, Hank approached, his face grave. "Where are you headed?" he asked, though I suspected he already knew. "A river trail," I replied. "Family of 4, 2 days overdue." Hank's face tightened. "That's deep country. Be careful out there." I nodded, trying to hide my unease. "Always am. It's probably just another case of city folks biting off more than they can chew." "Maybe," Hank said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "Take this with you." He pressed a smooth stone into my hand. It was dark green, almost black, with strange symbols etched into its surface. "What is it?" I asked, turning it over in my palm. "Protection," Hank replied cryptically. "I found it years ago on a trail that doesn't exist anymore. Just keep it with you, okay?" But the seriousness in his eyes stopped me. I pocketed the stone, thanked him, and climbed into the Jeep. As I drove toward the trailhead, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees loomed larger, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The usual sounds of the forest birdsong, the rustle of small animals, seemed muted, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. I tried to shake off the growing sense of unease. I was here to do a job, to find a lost family and bring them home safely. Whatever legends or superstitions existed about this part of the park, they were just that, stories. But as I parked at the trailhead and shouldered my pack, I couldn't help but feel like I was stepping into something far beyond my understanding. The stone in my pocket seemed to grow heavier, a tangible reminder of Hank's warning. With a deep breath, I set off down the trail, unaware that each step was taking me closer to a nightmare that would change my life forever. The Hoh River Trail was notorious for its beauty and its challenges. As I hiked deeper into the forest, the world around me transformed. The trees grew impossibly tall, their trunks covered in a thick layer of moss that muffled my footsteps. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the canopy, creating an otherworldly glow that danced across the forest floor. Under different circumstances, I might have found it breathtaking. But today, every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every unexpected sound made me flinch. I tried to focus on the task at hand, looking for any sign of the missing family, broken branches, discarded gear, anything out of place. As I pushed further along the trail, I noticed something odd. The trail markers, which were supposed to guide hikers, were either missing or damaged. It was as if someone or something had deliberately tried to make the path harder to follow. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered Hank's stories about trails that disappeared. I checked my map and compass, reassuring myself that I knew where I was, but doubt began to creep in. The forest seemed different somehow, older and more primeval than I remembered from previous trips. The air felt thicker, almost oppressive, and the metallic smell I'd noticed before grew stronger. After what felt like hours of hiking, I finally reached the area where the family's campsite was supposed to be. What I found made my blood run cold. The site was a mess, the tent half collapsed and belongings scattered as if someone had left in a hurry. But it was the eerie silence that got to me the most. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of the wind in the trees. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I called out, my voice sounding absurdly loud in the stillness. "Hello, park ranger, is anyone here?" There was no response, just that oppressive silence. As I investigated the campsite, my unease grew. The family's food had been torn open, but not in a way that suggested animal interference. Their cuts were too clean, too deliberate, And then there was the smell, stronger now, a sickly sweet odor that made my stomach churn. I radioed back to base, reporting my findings and requesting backup. The response was garbled, full of static, but I managed to make out that help would be on the way. I just had to hold tight and continue my search. That's when I heard it. A rustling in the underbrush, too deliberate to be the wind. I froze, my hand instinctively going to the knife at my belt. I called out again, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is the park ranger. If someone's there, please show yourself." The rustling stopped abruptly, then from the corner of my eye I saw movement. Just a flash, really, something darting between the trees about 50 yards away. It was fast, impossibly fast, and moved in a way that was decidedly not human. My heart pounding, I moved towards the spot where I'd seen the movement. The underbrush was thick here, and I had to push my way through, acutely aware of how vulnerable I was. That's when I stumbled upon the bone pile. Small bones, probably from birds and rodents, stacked in a crude, almost ritualistic manner. They were fresh, some still with scraps of flesh clinging to them. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. No animal I knew of displayed this kind of behavior. But rustling came again, closer this time, much closer. I turned slowly, my knife now drawn, though I knew it would be of little use against whatever was out there. Then I saw it standing just 10 feet away, half hidden by a gnarled old tree, a creature that defied description. Tall and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long for its body, its skin was a mottled gray-green, rough and leathery like tree bark. But it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Elongated like a wolf's muzzle, but with eyes that were disturbingly intelligent and undeniably malevolent. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. We stared at each other. I felt like a rabbit caught in the gaze of a wolf, my survival instincts screaming at me to run while my body remained frozen in terror. Then, with a sound that was part shriek and part growl, the creature lunged towards me. And finally, mercifully, my body responded. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and that abomination as possible. As I fled, I could hear it behind me, moving through the forest with an ease that no human could match. It wasn't running full out, I realized with growing horror. It was toying with me, enjoying the chase. I had no idea where I was going. The trail was long forgotten, and in my panic, I'd lost all sense of direction. All I knew was that I had to keep moving. I had to find a way out of this nightmare. Suddenly, the trees opened into a small clearing, and I skidded to a halt, nearly falling. What I saw there would be seared into my memory forever. The missing family lay scattered across the ground, their bodies twisted in ways that human bodies should never be. There was so much blood dried and dark against the forest floor. They had been dead for days, despite being reported missing only recently. I stood there frozen in horror, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. That's when I felt it, a presence behind me, the hot, fetid breath of the creature on the back of my neck. I closed my eyes, certain that my death was imminent. But then, a sound cut through the air. A gunshot, loud and sharp in the unnatural quiet of the forest. The creature shrieked, sound so piercing it felt like my eardrums might burst. I turned just in time to see it disappear into the trees, moving faster than my eyes could follow. Standing at the edge of the clearing, shotgun in hand and a look of grim determination on his face, was Hank. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his voice shaky but firm. I nodded, though I was far from okay. My world had just been turned upside down, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. As the sound of approaching vehicles reached us, the backup finally arriving, Hank put a hand on my shoulder. "What you've seen here," he said quietly, "it ain't something the world is ready for, you understand?" I did. Even as the clearing filled with other rangers and eventually law enforcement, I knew that the truth of what happened here would never see the light of day. How could it? Who would believe us? The official report would cite a wild animal attack, probably a bear or mountain lion. The strange circumstances, the unnatural speed of decay, the bone pile, all of it would be ignored or explained away. As I watched my colleagues go about their grim work cataloging the scene and preparing to remove the bodies, I felt a weight settle onto my shoulders. I had come to Olympic National Park seeking peace and a fresh start. Instead, I had stumbled into a world of ancient secrets and primal terrors, a world I could never fully leave behind. The stone Hank had given me seemed to burn in my pocket, a reminder that some truths are better left buried in the deep, dark woods. The days following the incident passed in a blur. I gave my statement to the authorities, carefully omitting any mention of the creature I had seen. Hank had made it clear that such details would only complicate matters, and deep down I knew he was right. Who would believe me anyway? The official report cited a tragic animal attack, likely a bear driven to aggression by the encroachment of humans into its territory. It was a neat, tidy explanation that everyone seemed eager to accept. Everyone except me. I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen, the unnatural way the creature moved, the intelligence in its eyes, the deliberate arrangement of bones. None of it fit with any animal behavior I'd ever encountered. And then there was the question of time. The family had only been reported missing for a couple of days, but the state of their bodies suggested they'd been dead much longer. As I tried to make sense of it all, I found myself drawn to Hank. He seemed to be the only one who understood what had really happened out there. How long have you known? I asked him one evening as we sat on the porch of his cabin watching the sun set behind the mountains. Hank took a long drag from his cigarette before answering. Known? Hell, kid, I'm not sure anyone really knows. But I've suspected for years. This park, it's got a history that goes back way before any of us were here. The local tribes they knew about it had legends, warnings about parts of the forest where even their bravest warriors wouldn't go. He paused, his eyes scanning the tree line as if expecting to see something emerge from the growing shadows. What we saw out there, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's things in these woods that defy explanation. Things that have been here for centuries, maybe longer. I shuddered, remembering the creature's otherworldly appearance. But why haven't more people seen them? Why isn't this common knowledge? Hank chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You think that family was the first to go missing out here? There's a reason some of those trails are barely marked. Why we warn people to stick to the designated camping areas. Most of the time, whatever's out there is content to stay hidden. But every now and then, he trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air between us. I fingered the stone he'd given me, which I had taken to carrying everywhere. And this was its story. Hank's eyes narrowed as he looked at the stone. Found that years ago on a trail that don't exist no more. It's got power, that much I know. Kept me safe more than once when things got weird out in the deep forest. I wanted to scoff, to dismiss it as superstition, but after what I'd seen, I wasn't in a position to dismiss anything. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. I went about my duties, led hikes, and helped maintain the trails. But everything felt different now. Every shadow in the forest seemed to hide potential dangers. Every autumn deepened into winter, the park transformed. Snow blanketed the landscape, muffling sounds and creating an eerie stillness. Tourist numbers dwindled to almost nothing, leaving us rangers to maintain the vast wilderness. But for me, the peace of winter brought no comfort. Sleep became my enemy. Every night I'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, the creature's face vivid in my mind. During the day, I'd catch myself staring into the woods, searching for movement that didn't belong. My colleagues noticed the change in me. Some attributed it to the trauma of finding the family's bodies. If only they knew the whole truth. One particularly cold morning in December, I was assigned to check on our remote weather stations. As I snowshoed through the silent forest, that familiar prickle of unease crept up my spine. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the crunch of snow beneath my feet and the stark beauty beneath the winter landscape. I reached the first station without incident, but as I approached the second, deep in the back country, something felt off. The station itself appeared untouched, but surrounding it were tracks I couldn't identify. They were too large for any animal native to the area, and the pattern was all wrong, as if whatever made them walked on two legs but with an unnatural gait. My heart raced as I radioed back to base, trying to keep my voice steady as I reported the strange tracks. The response was garbled, full of static, but I made out instructions to document what I could and return immediately. As I knelt to photograph the tracks, a twig snapped in the forest behind me. I whirled around, my hand instinctively going to the knife in my belt. There, just visible through the trees, was a dark shape, tall, unnaturally still, watching me. For a moment, I was paralyzed with fear. Then, remembering Hagstone, I gripped it tightly in my pocket and slowly backed away. The shape didn't move, but I could feel its gaze following me. As soon as I was out of sight, I turned and ran, my snowshoes kicking up plumes of powder as I fled back towards base. I made it back safely, but the encounter shook me to my core. When I developed the photos of the tracks, they came out blurry and indistinct, as if something had interfered with the camera. My report was met with skepticism. The tracks were dismissed as likely belonging to a large elk or possibly a bear, despite my insistence that they were like nothing I'd ever seen before. As winter wore on, more strange occurrences piled up. Rangers reported equipment malfunctioning in certain areas of the park. Unexplained sounds echoed through the valleys at night, and always there was that sense of being watched. I found myself spending more time with Hank, the only person who seemed to understand the true nature of what we were dealing with. Late one night, as we sat in his cabin, immersing mugs of strong coffee, he finally opened up about his own experiences. It was 78. He began, his voice low. I was just a rookie full of piss and vinegar. Thought I knew everything about these woods. He paused, taking a long sip of coffee. I was wrong, so damn wrong. Hank went on to describe an encounter eerily similar to mine, a routine patrol that turned into a nightmare. He'd seen not one but several creatures moving through the forest with inhuman speed and grace. They'd toyed with him for hours, herding him deeper into uncharted territory. I thought I was done for, Hank continued. But then I stumbled into this clearing. There was this, I don't know, altar, I guess you'd call it, made of stones with symbols carved into them. The creatures wouldn't come near it. It's where I found that stone I gave you. I leaned forward, hanging on every word. What does it mean, Hank? What are these things? Hank shook his head. I don't know, kid. Not for sure. But I've done some digging over the years. There are legends, old stories from tribes that lived here long before us. They speak of guardians of the forest, ancient spirits that protected the land from intruders. But somewhere along the line, something changed. The guardians became corrupted, turned into something twisted and malevolent. Or why haven't more people seen them? I asked, why isn't this common knowledge? Think about it, Hank replied. How many people go missing in national parks every year? How many are never found? And those that do see something, well, who believe them? It's easier to blame it on animals or exposure or people getting lost. The truth is too big, too scary for most folks to handle. As Hank spoke, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. The implications were staggering. If what he was saying was true, then the creature I had encountered was just the tip of the iceberg. There was an entire hidden world out there existing alongside ours, but largely unseen. So, what do we do? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. Hank's expression was grim. We keep watch, we protect who we can, and we hope to God that whatever's out there stays content with picking off the occasional lone hiker. As I left Hank's cabin that night, trudging through the snow back to my own quarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were sitting on a powder keg. How long before these creatures, whatever they were, decided that the occasional victim wasn't enough? And what could we, mere humans, do against forces that seemed to defy the laws of nature itself? Little did I know, events were already in motion that would force us to confront these questions head-on. The delicate balance between our world and theirs was about to be shattered, and I would find myself at the center of a conflict as old as the forest itself. As winter gave way to spring, an uneasy calm settled over the park. The strange occurrences seemed to have tapered off, and I began to wonder if perhaps the worst was behind us. But as the snow melted and the forest came back to life, so too did my sense of foreboding. It started with small things, hikers reporting odd noises at night, wildlife behaving erratically. Nothing concrete, nothing we could point to as definitive proof of something amiss. But for those of us who knew what to look for, the signs were there. Then, in late April, everything changed. A group of college students on a camping trip went missing. This wasn't unusual in itself. We had search and rescue operations fairly regularly. But something about this felt different. The students had been well-prepared, experienced campers, and they'd vanished from an area of the park that was well-traveled and considered safe. I was part of the initial search team. As we combed through the area where the students were last seen, that familiar sense of wrongness crept over me. The forest was too quiet. The air was thick with that metallic scent I'd come to associate with the creatures. We found the students' campsite on the second day of the search. It was a scene of chaos, tents shredded, belongings scattered. It was the trees surrounding the campsite that made my blood run cold. They were marked with deep gouges too high up to have been made by any normal animal, and arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate, almost like a language I couldn't understand. As I stood there staring at those markings, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to find Hank, his face grim. "This is it, isn't it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not hiding anymore." Hank nodded slowly. "Looks that way. The question is, why now? What's changed?" Before I could respond, a shout went up from one of the other search team members. It found something. A trail leading away from the campsite deeper into the forest. But it wasn't made by the students. The footprints were too large, too inhuman. Against my better judgment, I volunteered to follow the trail. Hank insisted on coming with me, and I was grateful for his presence. As we moved deeper into the forest, the world around us seemed to change. The trees grew denser, older. The light took on a greenish tinge, filtering through the canopy in strange patterns. We walked for what felt like hours, the trail becoming fainter but never quite disappearing. Then suddenly we emerged into a clearing unlike anything I'd ever seen before. At its center stood a massive stone structure, ancient and weathered. It resembled the altar Hank had described from his encounter years ago, but on a much larger scale. The stones were covered in the same strange symbols I'd seen carved into the trees. But it was what surrounded the structure that truly chilled me to the bone. Dozens of creatures like the one I'd encountered months ago moved around the clearing. They seemed to be in some sort of frenzy, circling the stone structure and emitting low thrumming sounds that made my teeth ache. Hank and I crouched at the edge of the clearing, hidden by the underbrush. We watched in horrified fascination as the creatures continued their bizarre ritual. Among them, I spotted flashes of bright color, scraps of clothing that could only have belonged to the missing students. "We need to get out of here," Hank whispered urgently. "We need to tell someone, anyone who listened." I nodded, but as we turned to leave, my foot caught on a root. I stumbled, snapping a twig underfoot. The sound, quiet as it was, echoed through the clearing like a gunshot. The creatures froze, then as one turned towards our hiding spot, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural intelligence fixed on us. In that moment, I knew our lives would never be the same. With a chorus of shrieks that seemed to shake the very air around us, the creatures surged towards us. Hank and I ran, crashing through the underbrush, our only thought being to put as much distance between us and those abominations as possible. As we fled, I could hear them behind us, moving through the forest with impossible speed and agility, but they weren't just chasing us. I realized with growing horror that they were hurting us, driving us in a specific direction. Just as I thought my lungs would burst from the effort, we burst out of the tree line. To my shock, we were back at the main ranger station. How we covered so much ground so quickly, I couldn't begin to understand. As we stumbled into the station, gasping for breath and wild-eyed, our colleagues stared at us in confusion and concern. And I knew deep in my gut that our problems were just beginning. Whatever balance had existed between our world and theirs had been irreparably shattered. The creatures were done hiding, and we, the unsuspecting humans who had encroached upon their domain, were about to face the consequences of our ignorance. As alarms began sounding and the station erupted into chaos, I caught Hank's eye. The look we shared was one of grim determination. Whatever was coming, we would face it together. The battle for Olympic National Park, and perhaps for humanity itself, had begun. As spring blossomed into summer, Olympic National Park became a battleground. The incident at the ranger station was just the beginning. Reports flooded in from all corners of the park. Hikers vanishing, rangers encountering creatures that defied description. Entire campsites found abandoned with signs of violent struggle. Authorities tried to keep a lid on things, but rumors spread like wildfire. Internet forums buzzed with theories ranging from government experiments gone wrong to alien invasions. As much as I wanted to dismiss these wild speculations, the truth was even stranger. Hank and I found ourselves at the center of it all. Our encounter in the clearing had made us reluctant experts, the go-to sources for information on the creatures. We spent the long hours poring over old maps, cross-referencing sightings, trying to piece together some understanding of what we were up against. One sweltering July afternoon, as we huddled over a map in Hank's cabin, a thought struck me. I said to Hank, tracing a pattern on the map, "Look at this. The sightings, the disappearances, they're not random. They're forming a pattern." Hank leaned in, his brow furrowed. "Son of a gun," he muttered. "It's like they're marking territory." As we studied the map, a chilling realization dawned on us. The creatures weren't just lashing out randomly. They were systematically reclaiming the park, pushing humans out of areas they considered their domain. Our discoveries led to a change in park policy. Certain areas were declared off-limits, ostensibly for environmental reasons. Rangers were armed, a controversial move that was explained away as a precaution against aggressive wildlife. We were fighting a sacred war, losing ground by the day. The summer tourist season brought new challenges. Despite the warnings in restricted areas, people flocked to the park in droves. Each new arrival filled me with dread, knowing that some of them might never make it home. One particularly harrowing incident occurred in late August. A family of 5 had gone missing near one of the restricted areas. Against my better judgment, I volunteered for the search party. As we ventured into the dense forest, the familiar sense of wrongness settled over me. We found the family's campsite in a small clearing. The scene was all too familiar: shredded tents, scattered belongings, and those unnatural claw marks on the surrounding trees. But this time, something was different. Among the chaos, I spotted a child's stuffed animal, miraculously untouched. As I knelt to examine it, I heard a soft whimper from the underbrush nearby. Cautiously, I approached, and there, huddled beneath a fallen log, was a young girl, the youngest member of the missing family. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she flinched away as I reached out to her. "It's okay," I said softly, trying to keep my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Now we're here to help. Can you tell me what happened?" The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "The monsters came. They took everyone else." I hid. As I coaxed the child out of her hiding spot, a twig snapped in the forest behind us. I whirled around instinctively, placing myself between the girl and whatever was out there. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of movement. The creatures were circling us, their inhuman shapes flitting between the trunks. I reached for my radio with shaking hands, calling for immediate backup. What followed was a tense standoff. Me, armed with nothing but a standard-issue pistol I knew would be useless against these beings, trying to protect a terrified child, and the creatures, for reasons I couldn't fathom, seemed hesitant to attack outright. It felt like hours, though. It was probably only minutes before I heard the blessed sound of approaching vehicles. The creatures melted away into the forest as my fellow rangers arrived, heavily armed and on high alert. As we rushed the girl to safety, I couldn't shake the feeling that we just witnessed a turning point. The creatures had taken most of the family but left the child. Why? Was it a moment of mercy or part of some larger, incomprehensible plan? As summer waned and the leaves began to turn, a sense of foreboding settled over the park like an early frost. The incidents had become more frequent, more brazen. It was as if the creatures were growing bolder, testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. Hank and I had thrown ourselves into research, spending countless hours in the park's archives and reaching out to experts in fields ranging from cryptozoology to Native American history. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, though it strained the limits of belief. The creatures, it seemed, were ancient guardians of the land, tied to the forest in ways we could barely comprehend. Native legends spoke of them as protectors, maintaining the balance between the natural world and the world of humans. But something had changed, whether due to environmental destruction, human encroachment, or some other factor. These once benevolent entities had become twisted, aggressive. Our breakthrough came on a crisp October morning. An old journal had been discovered in a forgotten corner of the park's archives, dating back to the early days of the park's formation. Its author, a ranger from the 1930s, described encounters eerily similar to what we were experiencing now. More importantly, he wrote of a potential way to communicate with the creatures, potentially negotiating a truce. The key, according to the journal, lay in the stone structures scattered throughout the park, the same kind where Hank had found the protective stone years ago. Armed with this new information, Hank and I proposed a dangerous plan to park management. We would venture into the heart of creature territory to the largest of these stone structures when identified. There we would attempt to make contact, finding a way to end this conflict before it spiraled completely out of control. The plan was met with skepticism and outright disbelief from some quarters. As the situation grew more desperate by the day, we were given reluctant approval. On a cold, misty morning in late October, Hank and I set out. While armed, though, we both knew our weapons would likely be useless. Our true protection, we hoped, would come from the knowledge we'd gathered in the strange, symbolic items we carried. Replicas of artifacts described in the old journal. As we hiked deep into the forest, the world around us seemed to shift. The trees grew older, more gnarled. The mist thickened, muffling sounds and playing tricks on our vision. More than once I caught glimpses of shadowy figures flitting between the trees, always just at the edge of perception. Finally, we reached our destination. The stone structure loomed before us, ancient and imposing. Symbols carved into its surface pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. Hank and I shared a look. This was it. Everything we'd learned, everything we'd experienced had led to this moment. With shaking hands, we began the ritual described in the journal, placing our artifacts in specific patterns around the structure. As the final piece fell into place, the air around us seemed to thicken. We missed swirls, taking on shapes that defied description. And then they appeared. Dozens of creatures surrounding us on all sides, but they made no move to attack. They simply watched, waiting. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward and began to speak, reciting the words we'd so carefully transcribed from the journal. I don't know if it was the words themselves or the intent behind them, but something changed in that moment. The creatures' postures shifted. The hostility that had radiated from them seemed to lessen. And then, impossibly, one of them stepped forward and began to communicate. Not in words, but in a series of images and emotions that flooded my mind. I saw the forest as it had been centuries ago, pristine and untouched. I felt the creatures' deep connection to the land. Their role as protectors was clear. And I understood their fear and anger at humanity's encroachment, the destruction of their home. For hours, Hank and I stood in that clearing, engaged in a communication unlike anything I'd ever experienced. We shared our own perspectives, our own fears. We spoke of coexistence, of finding a balance that could work for both our worlds. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, we reached an understanding. It wasn't a perfect solution. There was too much mistrust, too much history for that, but it was a start. A tentative truce, a promise to work towards a future where humans and these ancient guardians could coexist. As Hank and I made our way back to the ranger station, exhausted but filled with cautious hope, I knew that our work was far from over. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time since that fateful day when I'd first encountered the creature in the woods, I felt like we had a chance. The seasons had turned full circle, from spring to autumn, as my arrival and this revelation unfolded. The Little Big National Park had changed me in ways I could never have imagined. As I looked out over the forest, its leaves a riot of red and gold in the fading light, I knew that I would never see the wilderness the same way again. There are wonders out there, and terrors too, beyond anything I had ever dreamed. And I, for better or worse, was now a part of that world. The call came in just after dawn. 2 hikers, a young couple from out of state, had gone missing in Congaree National Park. It wasn't unusual. The park was nearly 27,000 acres of dense primordial swampland. It was easy to get turned around, to step off the trail and lose your way in a tangle of tupelo and bald cypress, but something about this felt different from the start. Maybe it was the way the ranger's voice quivered over the radio, or maybe it was the heavy, unsettling silence that hung over the swamp that morning. Either way, as I loaded my gear into the Jeep, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be a routine search and rescue. My name's Noah Holloway. I've been a ranger in Congaree for over a decade now, ever since I left the Army. I thought I'd seen it all in those cypress groves, from cotton mouths the size of my arm to lost hikers driven half-mad by dehydration and fear. But what I encountered that day changed everything I thought I knew about the park, but the very nature of the wilderness we so foolishly think we can control. I started down the river trail where the couple had last been seen. The towering hardwoods seemed to lean in over the path, their gnarled branches blocking out the one autumn sunlight. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the centuries-old vegetation slowly sinking back into the bog. Every step squelched in the mud, echoing through the eerie quietude. Usually, the swamp is alive with sound. The buzz of insects, the far-off squawk of herons, the occasional splash of a gator slipping into the black water. But that morning it was deathly silent. Even the winds seemed to still in the boughs above us. The only sounds were my own labored breathing and the thud of my heart in my ears. About a mile in, I found the first sign of trouble, a shredded backpack, its contents strewn across the trail, a broken camera, a single hiking boot, the laces torn and bloodied. I felt a chill skitter down my spine. This was no lost hiker. This was something else, something violent. I radioed back to base, but got only static in response. That wasn't unusual this deep in the park, but it left me feeling cut off, alone. I pressed on, following the trail of discarded belongings, each one painting a more disturbing picture than the last. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a tree, a gnarled stump rising up from the fetid water. But as I got closer, I realized it was moving, swaying slightly. And it wasn't a tree at all, it was humanoid. But only barely. It stood at least 8 feet tall, its limbs long and thin and twisted at unnatural angles. Its skin was like bark, rough and dark, mottled with moss and lichen. As it turned towards me, I saw that it had no face, just a smooth expanse of flesh where features should have been. In that moment, every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee back down the trail and never look back. But I was frozen, my boots rooted in the mud. My breath caught in my throat. And then it moved, unfolding itself from the shadows with a creak like old wood bending the wind. It came towards me, its movements jerky and erratic, as if it was learning how to use its own body. I fumbled for my sidearm, but my hands were shaking too badly to get a grip. And what good would a gun do against something like this anyway? It was close now, close enough that I could smell it, a reek of decay and stagnant water. Close enough to see that what I had taken from moss and lichen was actually pulsing, writhing, insects, thousands of them crawling in and out of the crevices in its skin. A scream built in my throat, but before I could release it, one of those long, twisted arms shot out, wrapping around my waist with a grip like iron. It lifted me effortlessly, bringing me close to that smooth, featureless face. And then, in a voice like the creaking of ancient trees in the wind, it spoke. "You should not have come here." The moods echoed in my head as the creature held me aloft, my feet kicking uselessly in the air. Its grip was crushing, squeezing the breath from my lungs. Spots swam in my vision, darkness encroaching from the edges. Just as I was sure I would black out, it released me. I fell to the ground, landing hard on my back in the mud. Pain shot through my body, but it was secondary to the terror, the incomprehensible reality of what was looming over me. I scrambled backwards, my hands sinking into the mire, my boots slipping on the sodden earth. The creature watched, its head tilting to one side in a gesture that might have been curiosity, if anything else. Then it stepped forward, leaves and twigs snapping under its feet. "Where are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice thin and reedy with fear. It didn't answer. Instead, it reached out again, those long fingers uncurling like the fronds of a fern. I rolled to the side, barely avoiding its grasp, and staggered to my feet. I ran, blind with panic, heedless of direction. Branches whipped at my face, roots seemed to reach up to snare my ankles. Behind me, I could hear it giving chase, its footsteps heavy and slow but inexorable. I don't know how long or how far I ran. Time lost all meaning in that green labyrinth with that unspeakable thing at my heels. All I knew was the burn in my lungs, the pounding of my heart, the certainty that if I stopped, if I faltered, it would be the end of me. And then, miraculously, the trees began to thin. Sunlight, watery and pale but unmistakable, filtered through the canopy ahead. I burst from the tree line, stumbling onto one of the Park Service roads. I collapsed onto the gravel, my chest heaving, my limbs shaking uncontrollably. I looked back at the swamp, expecting at any moment to see that twisted shape emerge from the shadows. But there was nothing, only the still and silent woods. It was then, as I lay there trying to piece together the shattered remnants of my understanding of the world, that I saw the blood. It was smeared on my shirt, my hands, splashed across the legs of my pants. But it wasn't mine. A cold horror dawned in the pit of my stomach. The missing hikers. I hadn't found any trace of them other than their scattered belongings. What if? I shook my head. unable to complete the thought. I couldn't dwell on that now. I had to get back, had to report what I'd seen. Though a part of me wondered, with a sinking feeling of dread, who would believe me? I was still miles from the visitor center, and my radio was lost somewhere in the swamp ripped away in my mad flight. So I started walking, each step in agony, my mind whirling with questions that had no answers. What was that thing in the swamp? Some undiscovered species, a relic of a primordial age, or something else, something that defied natural law, and why had it let me go? I don't know. All I knew as the visitor center finally came into view was that the swamp would never feel the same again. That thing was out there, lurking in the shadows, rotting, and heaven help anyone who stumbled across its path. The rangers at the visitor center took one look at me, muddy, bloodied, my eyes wild with fear, and immediately called for backup. Within an hour, the park was swarming with activity. Police, search, and rescue teams, even a few men in suits who wouldn't identify what agency they were with. They questioned me relentlessly, making me retell my story again and again until the words felt like meaningless sounds in my mouth. I could see the disbelief in their eyes, the sideways glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't have believed it either. But there was no denying the evidence. Stranded backpack, the broken camera, the blood, so much blood more than I'd realized in my terror. All of it pointed to something terrible happening in those woods. They sent out search parties, combing the area where I'd encountered the creature. But they found nothing, no sign of the missing hikers, no trace of the thing that had attacked me. It was as if the swamp had swallowed it all without a trace. As the days stretched into weeks with no answers, the official story began to change. The blood, they said, was from an animal attack, maybe a bear or cougar. Never mind that neither of those creatures are found in Congaree. The shredded belongings, the lack of bodies. Well, the swamp was a big place. It was easy to get lost and be claimed by the quick mud in the dark water. They stopped mentioning my story altogether. And when I tried to press the issue, I was met with a wall of bureaucratic stonewalling and thinly veiled threats about the stability of my job, my mental health. It didn't take long for me to get the message. They wanted me to drop it and let the whole thing fade into just another unsolved park disappearance. But I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing looming over me, felt the crushing strength of its grip. I knew what I'd seen, and I knew with a certainty that gnawed at my gut that it was still out there. So I started digging on my own time off the books. I pored over old maps of the park, looking for any anomaly or hint of something that didn't belong. I dredged up every scrap of local folklore I could find, every half-whispered tale of things in the swamp that didn't have a name. Most of it was just that folklore, the kind of stories that get passed around campfires to give kids a thrill. But there was one story, one thread that kept resurfacing, whispered by the old-timers who lived on the edges of the swamp for generations. They called it the Hollow Man, a creature born of the swamp, shaped from mud and rot and the bones of the dead. They said it was a guardian, a protector of the old ways, of the places man was never meant to tread. And they said that those who crossed its path were never seen again. I didn't want to believe it. The rational part of my mind rejected it as backwoods superstition, the ramblings of people who spent too long staring into the dark. But another part of me, the part that could still feel the imprint of those grasping fingers on my skin, wondered. I started spending more and more time in the swamp, retracing my steps from that fateful day, searching for perhaps answers or maybe just a glimpse of confirmation that I hadn't imagined at all. My colleagues began to whisper, exchanging worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking. I knew what they were thinking, that I cracked, that the stress of the job had finally gotten to me. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was chasing ghosts, but I couldn't stop. Because deep down in a place I hardly dared acknowledge, Part of me wanted to find it again, look that thing in the face and understand what it was, where it came from. Even if it cost me everything, even if it cost me my life. Months passed. The seasons turned from the lush green of summer to the skeletal gray of winter. The official investigation into the disappearances had long since been closed, the files gathering dust in some backroom cabinet. But for me, it was never over. The swamp had become my obsession, my white whale. Every spare moment was spent in those woods, wading through black water, slogging through sucking mud. I told myself I was looking for clues for some scrap of evidence everyone else had missed. But the truth was, I didn't know what I was looking for anymore. My appearance began to change to mirror the wildness of my thoughts. My hair grew long and tangled, my face gaunt and hollowed from too many missed meals. I looked like a man possessed, and perhaps I was. My wife left me sometime in the fall. I came home one evening to find her gone, and out on the kitchen table. She said she couldn't watch me destroy myself, couldn't compete with my obsession. I crumpled the note, let it fall to the floor. In a way, it was a relief. Now there was nothing to distract me from my search. Winter in the swamp is desolate. The trees stand bare and skeletal, their branches clawing at the leaden sky. The water turns to ice in the shallows, a thin, treacherous crust that can give way at any moment. But still, I pressed on, driven by a feverish need I no longer understood. It was on one of these frigid gray days that I found it, or rather it found me. I was deep in the heart of the swamp, miles from any trail or landmark. The cold had seeped into my bones, numbing my fingers even through my gloves. I was considering turning back when I heard a sound out of place in the winter stillness, a soft squelch of footsteps in the mud. I turned, expecting to see another ranger or maybe a lost hiker, but the figure that emerged from the trees was neither of those things. It was the Hollow Man, but it had changed since our last encounter. Its body, once a twisted mass of wood and plant matter, now seemed to be crafted from the very substance of the swamp. Mud dripped from its limbs, falling in heavy clots to the ground. Bones protruded from its chest and back, the pale ivory stark against the dark muck. It stood silent and still, regarding me with that eyeless face. I felt the old terror rising in my throat, but it was tempered now by something else, curiosity. And beneath that, a strange, dreadful thrill. "What are you?" I asked, my voice sounding thin and insignificant in the vastness of the swamp. For a long moment there was only silence. Then, to my shock, it answered. "We are the Guardian," it said, its voice like the wind whistling through dead reeds, the keepers of the old ways. I stared, my mind struggling to comprehend. "But why?" I asked. "Why kill those people?" "They trespassed," it said simply. "They did not respect the old ways. The swamp demands a price." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air shivered down my spine. "A price," I echoed hollowly. It inclined its head, a strangely human gesture. "A price," it confirmed, "as all things demand. Even you know, hollow way. You have paid a price for your obsession, have you not?" I thought of my wife, my job, the life I had let crumble to dust in pursuit of this thing. "Yes," I whispered, "and now you must pay one more." It began to move towards me, its steps slow and deliberate. I know I should run, should fight, should do something, but I was transfixed, rooted to the spot as surely as the cypress trees that surrounded us. It reached out, one muddy hand extending towards my face. I felt the cold touch of its fingers, the grit of soil against my skin, and then a blinding pain, a sensation of being torn, of being consumed. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me were those two empty sockets staring endlessly into the void. I awoke to pale light and the distant sound of voices. For a moment I didn't know where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The swamp, the creature, the searing pain. Sat up with a gasp, my hands flying to my face. But there was no wound, no mark at all. I was lying in a hospital bed, the starched sheets rough against my skin. An IV drip was attached to my arm. The steady drip of the fluid was the only sound in the sterile room. The door opened and a doctor walked in, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "it's good to see you awake." "What happened?" I croaked, my throat dry and painful. "You were found in the swamp," the doctor said. "Another ranger found you unconscious and hypothermic. You're lucky to be alive." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog from my mind. "The creature," I said, "the Hollow Man. Did they find it?" The doctor's brow furrowed. "Hollow Man? I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. There was no one else found at the scene." "But it was there," I insisted, struggling to sit up further. "I saw it. I spoke to it." The doctor laid a calming hand on my shoulder. "Mr. Holloway, you were in the early stages of hypothermia when you were found. It's not uncommon for people in that state to experience hallucinations, to see and hear things that aren't there." I stared at him, a cold realization settling in my gut. They didn't believe me. Of course they didn't. Why would they? I was the crazy ranger, the one who let his mind get swallowed by the swamp. I leaned back against the pillows, suddenly exhausted. "How long was I out there?" I asked quietly. 2 days, the doctor said. "Your wife has been notified. She's on her way." My wife. The thought sent a pain through my chest. She'd left me and I couldn't blame her. I'd left me long before she walked out the door, lost to my obsession. The doctor left and I was alone with my thoughts. Had it really been a hallucination, a fever dream conjured by my failing mind? Part of me wanted to believe that. That would be easier, wouldn't it? To write it all off as the ravings of a madman. But deep down I knew the truth. The Hollow Man was real. The Guardians were real. And the swamp had a hunger that could never be satisfied. The days passed in a blur of tests and questions, concerned faces and pitying looks. They released me eventually, with strict instructions to rest, to recover. But how could I rest, knowing what I knew? I went back to the swamp, not to search this time, but to say goodbye. I stood at the edge of the dark water, breathing in the fetid, familiar air. It was spring now, and the swamp was coming back to life, green shoots pushing up through the mud, the hum of insects filling the air. I thought of the missing hikers, of the countless others who had vanished over the years. Had they all fallen prey to the Guardians, to the old ways of the swamp? I would never know. That was the price of my survival, the burden I would carry for the rest of my days, the knowledge of a secret world hidden beneath the surface of the one we thought we knew. I turned my back on the swamp and began the long walk back to the world of the living. But a part of me would always remain there in the dark heart of the bog, with the Hollow Man and the mysteries of the old ways. Years have passed since my final encounter with the Hollow Man. I left the Park Service, left the state, tried to build a new life far from the shadow of the swamp, but it never really let me go. In my dreams, I still walk those muddy trails, still feel the cold touch of those grasping fingers. I wake in the night, my heart pounding, the taste of stagnant water in my mouth. My wife and I, we tried to make it work, but there was always a distance between us, a void that could never be bridged. She could see it in my eyes, the far-off look, the part of me that never really came back from the swamp. I keep tabs on Congre as much as I can from a distance. There are still disappearances, still whispers of things in the depths that defy explanation. But official reports always have a rational angle. Animal attacks, lost hikers, the usual stories. Only I know the truth. And it's a truth I'll carry to my grave. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I find myself wondering about the Guardians. Are they still out there stalking shadowed places, enforcing old ways? Or have they faded like much of the old world into myth and memory? I don't know, and in a way I'm afraid to find out. Because if they are still out there, if the Hollow Man still walks swamps, then maybe, just maybe, it's still waiting for me, waiting to collect final pride. But that's reckoning for another day. For now, I simply carry on, one foot in front of other, weight of my secrets like a millstone around my neck. For I am the keeper now, guardian of truth too terrible to tell. And that in the end is true horror of congruity. There's something about waking up in a strange place that messes with your head. It's like brain hasn't quite caught up with where you are, and for a few seconds you're stuck between where you were and where you are now. It's disorienting. That's how I felt when I woke up in the cabin off the beaten path in Arkansas. It was 2004, and I was just looking for a place to decompress for a few days. Name's Ben Talbot. And I've always been the kind of guy who needs space to breathe. I've been a long-haul trucker for 13 years now, and there's something comforting about being on the road. It's all straightforward. Pick up the load, drop it off, repeat. No drama, no BS. Well, at least until you park the rig and the miles behind you start feeling heavy. Sometimes it's not the miles you carry that weigh you down. It's the things you've seen along the way. I came to this cabin because my old buddy Mark insisted I take a break. He'd found this place during a hunting trip and said it was the perfect spot to clear your head. No self-service, no noise, just you and the trees, he told me. Sounded perfect, right? That was before I knew what really lurked out here. I got to the cabin late in the afternoon, unloaded my gear, and took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. It was peaceful like I'd hoped. There was something else, too. You ever get the feeling like someone's watching you? That prickle in the back of your neck that doesn't let you relax. I shook it off, figuring it was just me being paranoid after months of non-stop driving. The cabin wasn't anything fancy, just a small shack with enough space to stretch out, a creaky bed and a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in years. I wasn't here for luxury, though. I was here for quiet. As I unpacked my meager belongings, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to linger a little too long in the corners of the room, or how the wind whistled through the trees outside, almost like it was trying to whisper secrets. I told myself I was being ridiculous. After all, this was supposed to be my chance to relax, to forget about the stresses of the road for a while. I spent that first evening settling in, heating up some canned soup on the small propane stove I'd brought along. As I sat on the rickety porch, watching the sun dip below the tree line, I felt a sense of unease creep over me. The forest seemed to grow quieter as darkness fell, the usual chirping of crickets and rustling of small animals fading away to an eerie silence. At night, as I lay in the creaky bed staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't help but feel like I'd made a mistake coming here. But exhaustion soon took over, and I drifted off into a deep, dreamless sleep. The first night passed without incident, which was surprising. I've got a history with nightmares. You see some messed up things on the road, accidents, bodies, things no one should have to witness. But that night, I slept like a rock. It wasn't until the second night that things started to go south. I'd spent the day exploring the woods, just me and my thoughts. The forest was dense, the kind of place where you could easily lose your way if you weren't careful. I stuck close to the cabin, marking trees with bright orange tape to ensure I could find my way back. As I wandered, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had me spinning around expecting to see something, but each time there was nothing there. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows between the trees. I built a fire, cooked up some beans, and settled into the old rocking chair with a flask of bourbon. Everything seemed calm until the scratching started. It was subtle at first, like a branch scraping against the side of the cabin. I ignored it, chalked it up to the wind. but the scratching got louder, more insistent. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and opened the door to see what it was. Nothing, just the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I shook my head, muttering to myself, and went back inside. But the sound didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. The scratches turned into heavy thuds, like someone or something was hitting the walls from the outside. My first thought was a bear. They'd been spotted in these parts before, but this didn't sound like a bear. The noise was too deliberate, too calculated. I locked the door and sat there listening. The thud circled the cabin, slow and steady, like whatever was out there was trying to get in, but taking its time about it. No, I'm not a guy who scares easy. I've had close calls on the road, been in bar fights, even had a knife pulled on me once. But this was something different. As the night wore on, the noise intensified. It wasn't just scratching and thumping anymore. I could hear what sounded like low, guttural growls unlike any animal I'd ever encountered. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I just sat there, clutching the fireplace poker like it was a lifeline, waiting for the thing to make its move. But it didn't. Not yet. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the noises finally ceased. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My knuckles were white from gripping the poker so tightly. The next morning I stepped outside, fully expecting to see claw marks or some other sign of what had been out there. But the cabin looked untouched. I stood there, scanning the tray line, feeling more on edge than I wanted to admit. My truck was still parked where I left it, but for some reason I didn't feel like leaving just yet. It seemed stupid in hindsight, but something about the whole situation had me curious. I had to know what was out there. I spent the morning circling the cabin, looking for any signs of what had caused the disturbance during the night. The ground was soft from recent rain, but I couldn't find any tracks or markings that shouldn't have been there. It was as if the whole thing had been a vivid nightmare, but I knew better. The fear I'd felt, the sounds I'd heard, they had been real. As the day wore on, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to hike deeper into the woods, hoping to find some answers. I packed a small bag with water, some jerky, and a first aid kit. As an afterthought, I grabbed the fireplace poker. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little safer. The further I went, the thicker the trees became. The air grew colder, and that feeling of being watched intensified with every step. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no scurrying of small animals. It was as if the entire woods were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon something that stopped me in my tracks. At first glance, it looked like an old, overgrown hunting blind, but as I got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. It was a crude shack, pieced together with rotting wood and covered in moss. The smell hit me before I even stepped inside, like rotting meat mixed with damp earth. Curiosity got the better of me, so I pushed the door open. The interior was dark, but my flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing what was left behind. Animal bones, mostly deer, rabbits, a few others I couldn't quite identify. But then I saw it. In the corner, half buried under a pile of leaves and debris, was something unmistakably human. A skull picked clean with tufts of hair still clinging to it. I backed out of the shack, my heart pounding, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just some hunter's stash, this was a graveyard, and whatever had made it was still out there. As I turned to leave, my foot caught on something. I looked down to see a tattered journal, its pages yellow with age and damp. With shaking hands, I picked it up and flipped it open. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic, but I could make out enough to make my blood run cold. It's out there, always watching, always hungry, not human, not animal, something else. God help me. The last entry was dated just 2 years ago. I shoved the journal into my bag, my mind racing. I had to get out of here. I had to warn someone. As I looked up, ready to sprint back to the cabin, I realized with growing horror that I couldn't remember which way I'd come from. The trees all looked the same, the shadows seeming to shift and move around me. I was lost. Panic set in as I realized my predicament. The sun was already starting to set, and not being in these woods after dark was a death sentence. I tried to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers trying to grab me. I pulled out my compass, hoping it would at least point me in the general direction of the cabin. But as I watched, the needle began to spin wildly as if some unseen force was disrupting its mechanics. This was impossible. I'd used this compass for years without issue. What the hell was going on in these woods? As darkness began to fall, the noises started again. Lone growls and the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. I clutched the fireplace poker tightly, and my palms sweaty and my heart racing. I had to find shelter and fast. I stumbled through the darkening forests, tripping over roots and crashing through bushes. The sound seemed to be getting closer, coming from all around me. Then, just as I was about to give up hope, I saw it. A small cave, barely visible in the fading light. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being out in the open. I ducked inside, pressing myself against the cold, damp wall of the cave. The entrance was small enough that I hoped whatever was out there wouldn't be able to follow me in. As night fully descended, I sat there in the darkness, straining my ears for any sound of approach. Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. The noises outside the cave grew louder and more frenzied. I could hear sniffing as if something was trying to catch my scent. Then, suddenly, a face appeared at the entrance of the cave. In the dim moonlight, I could make out features that seemed to be a grotesque mix of human and animal. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural yellow light fixed directly on me. I scrambled backward, pressing myself further into the cave. The creature snarled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. It began to claw the entrance, trying to widen it enough to get through. I was trapped, with nowhere left to run. In desperation, I swung the fireplace poker, catching the creature across its snout. It reeled back with a howl of pain and fury. Taking advantage of its momentary distraction, I bolted from the cave, running blindly through the woods. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, my lungs burning with each breath. I could hear the creature crashing through the forest behind me, gaining ground with every passing second. Just when I thought it was over, that this thing would catch me and I'd end up like the poor soul whose skull I'd found, I burst through the tray line into a familiar clearing. The cabin loomed before me, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I crashed through the door, slamming it shut behind me and throwing the bolt. My breath came in ragged gasps as I leaned against the wood, listening intently. For a moment there was silence, then came the scratching, just like the night before, but more intense, more desperate. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows between the trees. I built a fire, cooked up some beans, and settled into the old rocking chair with my flask of bourbon. Everything seemed calm until the scratching started. It was subtle at first, like a branch scraping against the side of the cabin. I ignored it, chalked it up to the wind, but the scratching got louder, more insistent. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and opened the door to see what it was. Nothing, just the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I shook my head, muttering to myself, and went back inside. But the sound didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. The scratches turned into heavy thuds, like someone or something was hitting the walls from outside. My first thought was a bear. It had been spotted in these parts before, but this didn't sound like a bear. The noise was too deliberate, too calculated. I locked the door and sat there listening. The thud circled the cabin, slow and steady, like whatever was out there was trying to get in, but taking its time with it. Now, I'm not a guy who scares easy. I've had close calls on the road, been in bar fights, even had a knife pulled on me once. But this was something different. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there clutching the fireplace poker like it was a lifeline, waiting for the thing to make its move. But it didn't. Not yet. As the night wore on, the attacks on the cabin intensified. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to be testing the structure for weaknesses. I could hear wood splintering as it clawed at the walls and roof. The windows rattled in their frames with each impact. I moved from room to room, trying to anticipate where it might break through. The fireplace poker felt pathetically inadequate against whatever was out there, but it was all I had. As I passed by the window in the bedroom, a face suddenly pressed against the glass. It was the same creature I'd seen at the cave, its yellow eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. Our gazes locked for a moment. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. There was purpose behind those eyes. A hunger that went beyond mere physical need. It wanted something for me, something more than just my flesh. The glass of the window began to crack under the pressure of the creature's assault. I backed away, my mind racing. I wanted a weapon, something more substantial than the poker. That's what I remembered. The hunting rifle mounted above the fireplace. How the hell had I missed that before? I raced back to the main room, grabbing the rifle and searching frantically for ammunition. Just as my hand closed around a box of shells in a drawer, I heard the sound of breaking glass from the bedroom. With shaking hands, I loaded the rifle, the sound of the creature's claws on the wooden floor growing louder with each passing second. I positioned myself in the corner of the room, rifle aimed at the bedroom door. The scratching stopped, and for a moment all was quiet. Then, with a splintering crash, the bedroom door burst open. The creature stood there, illuminated by the dying embers of the fire. It was even more terrifying up close. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, it was covered in matted fur with long, wickedly sharp claws extending from its elongated fingers. But it was the face that truly chilled me to my core. It was like a twisted parody of a human face, elongated into a wolf-like snout, but with unmistakably human eyes. Eyes that held intelligence and a hunger that seemed to bore into my very soul. For a moment we just stared at each other, predator and prey, locked in a silent standoff. Then it lunged, faster than I thought possible for something of its size. I squeezed the trigger, the sound of the gunshot deafening in the confined space of the cabin. The creature howled in pain and fury as the bullet tore into its shoulder, but it didn't go down. I fired again and again, each shot driving it back, yet still it kept coming. Blood matted its fur, but it seemed to shrug off wounds that would have killed any normal animal. In desperation, I aimed for its head, squeezing off the last 2 rounds in rapid succession. The creature staggered, its movements becoming uncoordinated. It slumped against the wall, leaving a trail of dark blood as it slid to the floor. For a moment I thought it was over, but then, incredibly, it began to rise again. Out of ammunition and options, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the kerosene lamp from the table and hurled it at the creature. The glass shattered, dousing it in fuel. The moment the kerosene hit the embers of the fire, the creature went up in flames. It let out a howl unlike anything I'd ever heard before. A sound of pure agony that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. It thrashed wildly, spreading the flames to the wooden walls and floor. I knew I had only moments before the entire cabin would be engulfed. Grabbing my bag and the journal I found earlier, I bolted for the door. The heat was intense, the smoke already thick and choking. As I burst out into the cool night air, I heard a final agonized howl from within the inferno. Then silence, broken only by the crackling of flames. I stood there watching as the cabin burned, my temporary sanctuary now a funeral pyre for a creature that shouldn't exist. The fire cast long dancing shadows across the clearing, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw other shapes moving just beyond the tree line. More of them? I didn't want to find out. As the first light of dawn broke over the trees, the cabin was nothing more than smoldering ruins. I hadn't moved from my spot all night, too terrified to turn my back on the forest, too exhausted to try and find my way out in the dark. Now, in the harsh light of day, it all seemed like a nightmare. But the aches in my body, the smell of smoke clinging to my clothes, and the burnt-out husk of the cabin were all too real reminders of what had transpired. I made my way to my truck, eager to put this hellish place behind me. But as I approached, my heart sank. The tires had been slashed, deep gashes like something had taken a claw to them. I'm stranded. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural noise, almost like a laugh, that twisted and warped in a way that made my skin crawl. I spun around, and there it was. Standing at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows of the trees, was another creature, similar to the one I'd fought, but different. Larger, if that was possible, with a coat of silver-gray fur streaked with scars. It didn't move at first, it just watched me with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. And slowly it stepped into the light. Its hands, or claws I guess, were dripping with something dark. I didn't have to look too closely to know what it was. I backed toward the cabin's remains, my hand closing around a charred piece of wood. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The creature followed, slowly and deliberately, like it knew it had all the time in the world. It was toying with me, enjoying the fear radiating off me in waves. The creature lunged suddenly, faster than I expected, and I barely had time to react. I swung the makeshift weapon wildly, catching it across the arm. It howled, not in pain but in anger. The thing was pissed now, and I knew I was outmatched. I bolted for the tray line, hoping against hope that I could lose it in the dense forest. But I knew deep down that this was its territory. I was just prey, running on instinct and adrenaline. As I crashed through the underbrush, I could hear it behind me, moving with an ease that defied its size. Branches whipped at my face, roots seemed to reach up to trip me. The forest itself felt alive, conspiring with the creature to bring me down. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that green hell. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but still I pushed on. The sound of pursuit never faded, always just behind me, just out of sight. And just as I thought I couldn't take another step, I burst out onto a road. An actual paved road, cutting through the forest like a lifeline. I almost cried with relief, but my respite was short-lived. From the woods behind me came that bone-chilling howl. Not just one voice now, but many. A whole pack of those things calling to each other, coordinating their hunt. Me, I was the prey they were after. I ran down the road, my feet pounding on the asphalt. Each step sent jolts of pain through my exhausted body, but I didn't dare stop. The howls were getting closer. The creatures were moving faster through the familiar terrain of the forest than I could on the open road. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw headlights in the distance. A car was approaching. I waved my arms frantically, screaming for help. The vehicle, an old pickup truck, slowed as it neared me. The driver, an older man with a weathered face, took one look at my battered appearance and the terror in my eyes and simply said, "Get in." I didn't need to be told twice. As I clambered into the passenger seat, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the road, several pairs of glowing eyes reflecting the truck's headlights, and I could make out the hulking shapes of the creatures lurking just beyond the tray line. The driver floored it, and we took off down the road. I slumped in my seat, the adrenaline that had kept me going finally wearing off. As the miles rolled by and the forest receded behind us, I began to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe I'd actually survived this nightmare. The driver, who introduced himself as Earl, didn't ask many questions. He just nodded grimly when I mentioned the cabin and the creatures in the woods. "Ain't the first time I've picked up someone running scared from those parts," he said. "Won't be the last, neither." As we drove, I pulled out the journal and he found in the shack. Now that I had a moment to really look at it, I realized it wasn't just one person's writings. There were multiple handwritings spanning decades, all telling similar stories of encounters with the creatures in the wood. Some entries were cut off mid-sentence, leaving me to imagine the fate of the writers. Others spoke of barely escaping, of lost friends and family members, and through it all, a common thread. The creatures were getting bolder, venturing further from their forest home. It all dropped me off at a small-town police station. I tried to tell my story to the officers, but I could see the disbelief in their eyes. They humored me, took my statements, but I knew they didn't really believe me. To them, I was just another crazy person with a wild tale. But I know what I saw, what I experienced. Those creatures are real, and they're out there waiting, watching, hungry. As I sit here now, writing this all down, I can't help but wonder how many others have encountered these things, how many didn't make it out to tell their stories, and most chillingly, how long before these creatures decide to venture beyond their forest into more populated areas. I don't have answers to these questions, but I do know one thing. I'll never look at a dark forest the same way again. Because now I know what can be lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for unsuspecting prey. So if you're ever driving through Arkansas and come across a lonely cabin in the woods, just keep driving. Don't stop. Don't explore. And if you hear scratching in the night, pray it's just the wind. Because it might be something far, far worse. I'm done with long-haul trucking. I'm settling down somewhere with wide open spaces and not a tree in sight. Because the open road might have its dangers, but they're nothing compared to what's hiding in those woods. Remember, if you're out there and you hear something that doesn't sound quite right, something that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, trust your instincts, run, and hope that you're faster than what's chasing you. As for that flask of bourbon, I never did get to finish it. Somehow I think I'm better off without it. Some things are better left behind, lost in the woods with the monsters. I've never been good with people, which is probably why I liked working with computers. But in 2012, I made a mistake that pushed me into something far worse than a career change. As a systems analyst, yeah, I know, real exciting until I got laid off during some corporate reshuffling nonsense. It's like they suddenly remembered humans were still part of the equation, not that I was much of one. You know how it goes when your life gets flipped. Panic mode, right? So I figured I'd start fresh. There was this remote job that looked perfect, a data specialist for an isolated logging company in Montana. Pay was solid, and honestly, the idea of being far from people sounded ideal. So I packed up my car and drove out to this nowhere town called Powell Junction. There's no need to imagine it, it's exactly as dull as it sounds. One bar, a gas station, and some sad excuse for a diner. Well, I like my quiet, but Powell Junction, that place had a special kind of silence. I showed up in the middle of July. So it wasn't the dead of winter, but it felt like it. There was this weight in the air, like the town was holding its breath. I wasn't armed, maybe that's the first mistake, considering what happened next. See, I'd grown up in suburban Illinois, where the most dangerous thing you could face was a squirrel, high on leftover Halloween candy. So why would I pack a gun? Hell, I hadn't even bought bear spray. And looking back, I really should have listened to the guy at the gas station who asked me if I was heading into the mountains and chuckled when I said yes. His weathered face crinkled into a knowing smirk, but I brushed it off as small-town quirkiness. If only I'd known then what that smirk really meant. The logging camp was deep in the woods about an hour's drive from the main road. My job? Simple. I was supposed to manage data logs for the logging equipment, track supplies, and make sure nobody was fudging numbers. All remote work tucked away in a trailer they'd set up as a makeshift office on the edge of the forest. They didn't need me there all the time, just a week every month. I figured I'd get in, do the job, then go back to whatever passed for civilization in Powell Junction. As I drove up the winding dirt road to the camp, the trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I told myself it was just my imagination, but even then a chill ran down my spine. The first couple of days were uneventful, just what I wanted. The guys working the camp barely talked to me, and I didn't mind. It was also normal that when weird things started happening, I almost didn't notice. It began with small stuff. I'd hear noises at night outside the trailer. Not unusual for the woods, right? But these sounds weren't the rustling of leaves or a deer passing by. We were heavier, like someone or something was moving through the trees, staying just out of sight. I brushed it off because I'm a grown man who's not supposed to be afraid of shadows. But by the fourth night, I was sleeping less, getting jumpy over every creak or thud. The camp workers started giving me strange looks, and the foreman, an older guy named Bill, who spoke with the kind of voice that sounded like he'd smoked every cigarette in Montana, asked me if I was doing okay. I lied. Of course, I said I was fine because what else was I gonna say? That I was hearing things. They'd laughed me out of there. But the truth was, I was starting to feel like something was watching me. Not just at night, but during the day too. I'd be working in the trailer, inputting data, and suddenly feel this prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I'd turn around, half expecting to see someone or something staring at me through the window. But there was never anything there. Just the endless sea of trees swaying gently in the breeze. One afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. I stuck close to the camp, not wanting to get lost in the dense forest. That's when I saw it. A set of tracks in the soft earth near the edge of the clearing. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before. Too big to be a wolf or a mountain lion with long, sharp claw marks gouging the dirt. And the stride, it was all wrong. Like whatever made them was walking on two legs, but in a way no human could. I stood there staring at those tracks, feeling my heart hammer in my chest. That's when Bill came up behind me, making me jump out of my skin. "What you're looking at there, city boy?" he asked, his voice gruff but tinged with something else. Was it fear? I pointed at the tracks, expecting him to be as shocked as I was, but he just nodded. His face grim. "Best not to go poking around out here," he said. "The woods can play tricks on your mind." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me to wonder what the hell he wasn't telling me. The real trouble began when one of the loggers didn't show up for work. Bill said it happened sometimes. Guys would go into town, drink too much, crash at a buddy's place. But then another one disappeared the next day. I wasn't the only one getting spooked. The camp was on edge. Whispered conversations stopped abruptly when I walked by. I caught snippets here and there, mentions of old legends, and it's happening again. But no one would give me a straight answer when I asked what was going on. Mole organized a small search party, and I tagged along because hell, sitting in the trailer alone wasn't appealing anymore. We set out at dawn. The morning mist still clung to the trees. The forest seemed different now, more menacing. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every rustle of leaves a possible danger. We found the first guy, or what was left of him. He'd been torn apart. There's no other way to put it. I'm not forensic expert, but I've seen enough crime shows to know that what happened to him wasn't from a fall or some accident with the equipment. His limbs were scattered like something had ripped them clean off. I didn't throw up, but I felt like I might. Bill and the others just stared in silence before deciding to take the body back to camp. As we gathered the remains, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The wound. It matched those tracks I'd seen earlier. long, deep gashes that could only have been made by massive claws. The trek back to camp was tense. No one spoke, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew something they weren't telling me. That night, the noises outside the trailer got louder and closer. I couldn't bring myself to look. I don't know if that makes me a coward or smart, but I just lay there clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. The battery was low and there was no signal out here anyway. I was truly alone. As I lay there trying to convince myself that it was just the wind, I heard something that made my heart stop, a low guttural growl unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was close, too close. And then a scream pierced the night, human, terrified, and quickly cut short. I knew then that whatever was out there, it wasn't just some animal, and it was hungry. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed with fear, before I heard the commotion outside. Men were shouting, flashlights cutting through the darkness. I forced myself to move to get up and see what was happening. The camp was in chaos. Men were running through the trees, shouting and shining flashlights into the dark. I caught a glimpse of something. Tall, fast, and not human. It was covered in matted fur, moving on all fours like a beast, but with a hunched, twisted form that reminded me of old-time carnival freaks you'd see in black and white photos. I couldn't compare it to any animal I knew. It wasn't a bear, I can tell you that much. A few other things were hunting us. I grabbed a flashlight from one of the loggers and did the dumbest thing possible. I followed the sounds, calling it adrenaline or stupidity, but my feet moved faster than my brain could keep up. I was running through the trees, chasing after shadows until I saw it, one of the loggers being dragged into the woods. He was screaming, but his sound was cut short. I didn't stop to help him, and before you judge me, just know that by the time I saw what was dragging him, there was no helping anyone. It had this wolf-like snout, but the body was wrong. Twisted like it had broken every bone and healed crooked. Long arms with claws that looked like butcher knives, slashing through the trees as it moved with an eerie speed. And the smell, it was like rot, like something that had been dead for days but was still walking around. I ran. That's all I could do. My lungs burned, branches whipped at my face, but I didn't stop. I could hear it behind me, crashing through the underbrush. In that moment, I knew true terror. The kind that strips away everything you thought you knew about the world and leaves you raw and exposed. Somehow, I made it back to the camp. Bill was trying to radio for help, but the signal was dead. Of course it was. We were alone out here with those. I grabbed the keys to one of the trucks and tried to convince the few remaining guys to come with me. Some did, but others, they were too far gone, shocked maybe. I just sat there, muttering about how they'd seen it before, that it came with the woods. As we piled into the truck, I caught sight of one of the creatures at the edge of the clearing. It stood upright now, easily 7 feet tall. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, fixed on us, and then it smiled, horrible too-human smile full of razor-sharp teeth. I gunned the engine and we tore out of there, the sounds of howls and screams fading behind us. The drive out of there was the worst kind of nightmare. I kept seeing flashes of movement in the rearview mirror, hearing scratches against the side of the truck. The road twisted and turned, and more than once I thought we were going to go off the edge. The other guys in the truck were silent, shell-shocked. One of them, a younger guy named Mike, kept mumbling something under his breath. I couldn't make it out at first, but as we got closer to town, I realized he was saying, "They'll come for us. They always come." We made it to Powell Junction, though barely. The truck was a mess, covered in deep scratches and dents. As we pulled up to the sheriff's office, I noticed dark stains on the side. I didn't look too closely, I didn't want to know. The authorities didn't believe us, of course. I mean, what could we say? That something had torn apart 2 men and was stalking the woods. The sheriff, a heavy-set man with a skeptical squint, listened to our story with growing impatience. "Look," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I've heard all kinds of tall tales about those woods. Bigfoot, Wendigos, you name it. But I deal in facts. And the fact is, you boys probably saw a bear, maybe a couple of them. It's been a hard year. They're coming down from the mountains looking for food." I wanted to scream at him, tell him that no bear could do what we saw. But I could see it in his eyes. He made up his mind. To him, we were just some city boy and a bunch of drunk loggers spinning yarns. They sent out a team, but nothing came of it. They said it must have been a bear, an animal attack. But I know bears. This wasn't one. As we sat in the diner waiting for the authorities to finish their investigation, I noticed something. The locals were watching us. Not openly, but I could feel their eyes. And there was something in their expression. Not disbelief, but recognition. I knew. Maybe not the details, but I knew something was out there in those woods. An old woman at the counter caught my eye. She gave me a sad, knowing smile before turning away. I wanted to go to her and ask what she knew. But before I could, Bill put his hand on my shoulder. "Let it go, son," he said, his voice weary. "Some things folks around here don't talk about for good reason." I didn't go back to the camp. Bill and a few others did, but I packed up my stuff and drove as far from Montana as I could. As I crossed the state line, I felt like I could breathe again. But I knew deep down that this wasn't over. Not really. The weeks following my escape from Powell Junction were a blur. I drove endlessly, stopping only when exhaustion forced me to. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those creatures and heard the screams of the men they took. I tried to go to the media to tell my story, but who would believe me? A data analyst spinning tales of monsters in the woods. I'd been laughed out of every newsroom in the country, and part of me didn't want to believe it myself. Maybe if I kept quiet, pretended it never happened, I could go back to my normal life. But normal was a thing of the past. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched even in crowded cities. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, and every unexpected noise made me jump. I was a wreck, and I knew it. I started researching, digging into the history of Powell Junction and the surrounding area. What I found chilled me to the bone. There were stories, old legends of the native tribes who once lived there. One night, about a month after I left Montana, I got a call. It was Bill. His voice was slurred as if he'd been drinking heavily. "They're coming," he said. His words were barely above a whisper. I can hear them outside. They followed us. The line went dead. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. I never heard from Bill again. That night I packed up and moved again. I didn't know if what Bill had said was true, if those things could really have followed us, but I wasn't taking any chances. I'd seen what they could do. As I drove away from yet another temporary home, I realized something. I might have escaped those woods, but a part of me was still there and always would be. Months passed, and I tried to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. I'm back to working with computers now. It's safer that way. The only thing I have to worry about is forgetting to update my firewall. At least that's what I tell myself. But the truth is, I'm never really safe. Never really at peace, because I know what's out there, lurking in the dark corners of the world. And I know that one day it might come for me again. I still check the news looking for reports of missing people in those woods. There are always a few, but they never make the front page. Just another statistic, another tragedy chalked up to the dangers of the wilderness. The logging camp shut down shortly after, citing financial reasons. Sure, I know the real reason. They couldn't keep sending men out there to die. But they couldn't tell the truth either. Who would believe them? Sometimes late at night, when the world is quiet and still, I think I hear something outside my window. A low growl, a scrape of claws against concrete. I tell myself it's just my imagination, my mind playing tricks on me. But I know better. I've seen what's really out there. I've thought about going back, to Powell Junction, to those woods, to face whatever is out there. But I'm not that brave. Or maybe I'm just smart enough to know that some things are better left alone. But here's the thing that really keeps me up at night. What if those creatures, whatever they are, aren't content to stay in their woods anymore? What if they're spreading, moving into other forests, other towns? How many more people will disappear before someone finally believes? I've tried to warn people, anonymously of course, posted on forums, sent letters to authority, but I'm just one voice in a sea of conspiracy theorists and crackpots. Who's going to listen to me? So I wait, and I watch. And I hope that I thought I'd left it all behind, that the past has a way of catching up to you. It started with an email. Anonymous, untraceable. Just a few cryptic words. This spreading. We need your help. At first, I ignored it. Chalked it up to some prank or a fellow conspiracy theorist who stumbled across one of my old forum posts. Then came the news reports. Hikers going missing in national parks across the country. Strange animal attacks in rural areas, always with the same chilling details. Bodies torn apart. Strange tracks found at the scene. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started digging again, reaching out to contacts I made during my initial research. Most didn't want to talk, but a few had stories to tell. Stories that matched what I'd seen in those Montana woods. One night I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was familiar, though. It was Mike, one of the loggers who'd escaped with me that night. They found me, he said, his voice trembling. I thought I was safe, but they found me. You need to. The line went dead. I tried calling back, but nothing. That's when I knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. I packed a bag, loaded up my car, and hit the road. I didn't know where I was going exactly, but I knew I couldn't sit idle anymore. Whatever was out there, it was spreading. And for some reason it seemed like I was at the center of it all. As I drove through the night, my headlights cutting through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That something was following me, always just out of sight. I don't know what I'll find at the end of this road. Maybe answers, maybe just more questions. But I know one thing for certain, the monsters are real. They're out there and they're hungry. This isn't the end of my story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I stop running and start fighting back. 'Cause if I don't, who will? As I cross state lines heading back towards the mountains I once fled, I can't help but wonder, am I driving towards my salvation or my doom? Either way, I know there's no turning back now. The hunt is on, but this time I'm not the prey. I'm the hunter. And so my journey continues into the heart of darkness, towards the truth that lurks in the shadows. Whatever happens next, I'll face it head on. Because the alternative, letting these creatures continue their reign of terror unchecked, is unthinkable. If you're reading this, consider it a warning. The world is not what you think it is. There are monsters out there hiding in plain sight, and they're coming for us all. Stay vigilant, stay safe. And above all, don't go into the woods alone. This is my story, my truth, and it's far from over. The problem with hiking alone in the mountains, especially near the Montana-Idaho border in 1997, is that you never quite feel like you're truly alone. That's the first thing I noticed when I pulled into the gravel parking lot at the trailhead. I'm Paul Garrison, 41, and after my recent divorce, I needed some time away from the world. People kept saying it'd get easier, but they were full of it. That's the kind of thing people say when they're still clinging to the idea that life is supposed to make sense. I wasn't armed. I hadn't bothered to bring anything but the essentials, a flashlight, a map, some snacks, and my ancient Swiss Army knife, which probably wouldn't cut through warm butter anymore. The whole point was to get away from the world, away from the chaos that was my life, not to prepare for some apocalypse. I didn't own a gun because my ex-wife was paranoid about them, and frankly I'd never been a fan of them either. What could I possibly need it for out here? The trail was quiet, save for the occasional wind rustling through the trees or the crunch of my boots on the dirt path. The area was remote, just the way I liked it. No tourists, no loud campers, just peace. As I hiked deeper into the wilderness, the weight of my recent past seemed to lift slightly. The divorce papers, the arguments over who gets what, the pitying looks from friends, all of it faded with each step I took into the forest. The trees towered above me, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. After an hour of walking, the trail started to incline sharply, forcing me to slow down and take in the surroundings. Pine trees stretched up like columns, their tops lost somewhere above me, and jagged cliffs stood sentinel over the valley below. The air grew thinner, and my breath came in short gasps as I climbed. That's when I saw her, a hiker passing by me going in the opposite direction, a woman with a big lopsided backpack. She gave me a nod, a smile that seemed too forced for someone just out on a hike, but I didn't think much of it. She looked like she'd been through something, and hey, who hadn't? Maybe she had taken the trail to clear head too. As we passed each other, I caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. A haunted look, like she'd seen something she couldn't quite explain. But before I could dwell on it, she was gone, disappearing down the trail behind me. I shook off the uneasy feeling and continued my ascent. The forest seemed to close in around me. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead. The silence deepened, broken only by my labored breathing and the occasional snap of a twig under my boots. That's when I noticed something weird. Along the path, pine needles were scattered in a way that didn't make sense, like something had swept through, dragging something heavy. It wasn't the kind of thing you could just pass off as natural. I knelt down to inspect it, my hand grazing the needles and dirt. Something big, heavier than a deer, had been through here. I figured maybe someone was dragging their gear or injured, but I didn't see anyone around. As I stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands, a chill ran down my spine. The forest suddenly felt different, alien somehow. The trees seemed to loom over me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just my imagination running wild after months of stress and sleepless nights. But as I continued down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The birds had gone quiet, and even the wind seemed to have died down. It wasn't until I got deeper into the woods where the trees started to press in tighter that the feeling of being watched set in. That primal itch in the back of your neck, you know? The one that tells you something's not right, like when you're in a crowded bar and someone across the room is glaring at you for no reason. I chuckled to myself and kept moving. I was being ridiculous, wasn't I? This was supposed to be my escape, my chance to clear my head and find some peace. Instead, I was letting my imagination run wild, seeing threats where there were none. But as I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about these woods, about nature itself. Something that would change my life forever. 2 hours into my hike, I saw it. I should have turned back then, but I didn't. Humans are stupid like that. We see something odd, something that doesn't fit the narrative of what we think the world is. And instead of running away, we get curious. Like we're trying to prime something to the universe. There was a clearing, or what used to be one. The trees around it had been snapped, not like by a storm, but twisted at odd angles. Some looked like they'd been wrenched apart by giant hands. In the middle of the clearing was a pile of bones, big ones, The kind you'd expect to see in a museum. Not here. They were bleached white, cracked open like someone or something had been at them. My first thought was, but the cracks in the bones weren't right. They were too clean, too deliberate. No teeth marks, no tearing. Something else had done this. I don't know what possessed me to take another step into that clearing. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it was all in my head, that this was just a natural thing. Maybe I thought I could chalk it up to poachers. But my fate moved on their own, stepping closer to the center of that mess. The air in the clearing was different, heavy with a metallic scent that reminded me of old pennies. As I approached the pile of bones, I could see that they weren't just animal remains. There were human bones mixed in. A femur here, a fragment of a skull there. My stomach churned and I felt the urge to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But curiosity, that damned human trait, kept me rooted to the spot. I knelt down, my hand hovering over a particularly large bone. It looked like it might have been part of a moose or an elk, but it was hard to tell. The bone had been split lengthwise, the marrow scooped out with surgical precision. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the woods, like metal scraping stone, sent a chill through my spine. I turned, hoping it was the wind, hoping it was anything but what I feared. What I saw, though, was far worse than anything I could have imagined. The first thing I noticed was its size. It stood at least 7 feet tall, hunched, but not like a man. Its limbs were too long, too twisted. The skin, or whatever you call it, was matted with fur, but not like any animal I knew. It was patchy, like it had been ripped off in places, exposing dark, raw muscle underneath. And in its mouth, too wide, stretching where a jaw shouldn't stretch, open, revealing rows of jagged, uneven teeth like a bear's, but not. Bears don't have teeth that look like they've been carved with a hacksaw. I froze. Not the kind of freeze where you're thinking, oh, I'm dead, but the kind where your brain doesn't even process what's happening. It just stops. I might have screamed. What I do know is that the thing moved fast. One moment it was at the edge of the clearing, and the next it was barely 10 feet away from me. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were fixed on me with an intelligence that was unmistakably predatory. In that moment, every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. And for once, I listened. I ran. I ran harder than I ever have in my life, though I didn't even know where I was going. The trail was a blur beneath me, the trees whipping past as I tore through the underbrush, branches snapping against my skin. That thing was behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I could hear it, though, the crashing, the breaking of branches under something far heavier than any man. Its breathing, if you could call it that, was a ragged, guttural sound that seemed to echo through the forest. My lungs burned and my legs felt like they were on fire, but I kept pushing. I had no idea how long I'd been running or how far I'd gone. The forest all looked the same, an endless maze of trees and shadows. For all I knew, I could have been running in circles. At some point, I tripped. Classic horror movie crap, right? Except I'm not in some slasher flick. I'm just a guy who took the wrong damn trail. I hit the ground hard, the wind was knocked out of me, my hands scraping against rocks and dirt, and then silence. The thing had stopped. I couldn't hear it anymore. I pushed myself up, groaning from the pain. My legs were shaking and I could barely get them under me. My throat was dry, my chest burning from the run. I looked around, but there was no sign of it. Just when I thought maybe I'd outrun it, maybe it wasn't following me anymore. I heard a sound that stopped my heart. It wasn't behind me, it was above. I hopped up and that thing, whatever it was perched in the branches of the pine tree right above me, its twisted limbs gripping the bark like a spider. Its face, or what was left of it, twisted into something like a smile. And for a second I swore I heard it laugh. My heart raced again, and I scrambled backward, tripping over myself. I heard a drop from the tree, a sickening thud as it landed on all fours, its eyes... No, not eyes tracking me. There was nowhere to go. The thing lunged forward, its mouth stretching open again as if it could swallow me whole. I thought I was done. There was nothing I could do. My legs had given out, my body too tired to keep running. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. That's when the rifle shot echoed through the trees, a sharp crack that rang through the forest like thunder. The thing stopped mid-leap, its body jerking violently as a bullet ripped through its chest. It stumbled back, snarling if you could call it that. And before it could make another move, a second shot followed, hitting it square in the head. It collapsed, twitching for a moment before it went still. I turned my head toward the sound of boots crunching on the ground. The woman from earlier, the one with the big lopsided backpack, stood there holding a rifle. Her face was grim, and she didn't say a word. She just walked over to the creature and nudged it with her boot and then turned to me. "You should leave," she said flatly. "There are more of them." And with that, she started walking back the way I'd come, like this was just another day in the woods for her. I didn't argue, my legs were jelly, but I forced myself up, hobbling down the trail as fast as I could. "Wait," I called out, my voice hoarse. "What was that thing? Who are you?" She stopped and turned back to me, her eyes scanning the forest around us. "Name's Maggie," she said, her voice low and urgent. "And that's something that shouldn't exist. Now move. We need to get out of here before dark." I had 1,000 questions, but the tone of her voice and the way she kept glancing around told me now wasn't the time. I followed her, trying to match her brisk pace despite my exhaustion. As all walked, I couldn't help but notice how she moved. It wasn't the casual stride of a hiker. She was alert, her eyes constantly scanning our surroundings, her rifle at the ready. This woman, Maggie, she knew these woods. And more importantly, she knew about those things. "How long have you been hunting them?" I asked, breaking the tense silence. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Too long," she replied. "Ever since they took my brother 5 years ago, been trying to wipe them out ever since." And I felt a chill run down my spine. "Took your brother? You mean there are more? Were they?" Maggie sighed, her pace never slowing. "They're not from here. That's for damn sure. Some say they're aliens. Others think there is some kind of government experiment gone wrong. I don't care what they are, I just know they need to be stopped." We walked in silence for a while, the forest growing darker around us. I could hear strange noises in the distance, sounds that didn't belong in any woods I knew. "We need to find shelter," Maggie said suddenly. "It's not safe out here after dark. They hunt in packs at night." I nodded, too tired and scared to argue. As we veered off the main trail, heading towards what looked like a rocky outcropping, I couldn't help but think about how my simple hiking trip had turned into a nightmare. And I had a feeling it was far from over. Maggie led me to a small cave hidden behind a cluster of boulders. It was well concealed. If I didn't know it was there, you'd walk right past it. As we squeezed through the narrow entrance, I noticed marks carved into the rock. Symbols I didn't recognize. "Protection wards," Maggie explained, catching my questioning look. "They don't like them, they won't keep them out entirely, but it makes them uncomfortable enough to stay away most of the time." The interior of the cave was surprisingly spacious. Maggie had clearly been using it as a base of operations. There were supplies stacked against one wall, canned food, water bottles, ammunition. A sleeping bag was rolled up in one corner, and a battery-powered lantern sat on a makeshift table fashioned from a flat rock. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, setting down her rifle and shrugging off her backpack. "We're going to be here a while." I sank to the ground, my back against the cool cave wall. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the full weight of what had happened began to settle in. I'd nearly been killed by something. Something that shouldn't exist. You okay? Maggie asked, handing me a bottle of water. I took a long drink before answering. No, I said honestly. I don't think I am. What were those things? Maggie sat down across from me, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the lantern. In the light, I could see the lines of exhaustion etched into her face, and the haunted look in her eyes. We call them skinwalkers, she said. But that's not really accurate. There's something else entirely. They showed up about 7 years ago. At first it was just cattle going missing, then hikers started disappearing. She paused, taking a swig from her own water bottle. My brother, Tom, he was a forest ranger. He was one of the first to notice something was wrong. He'd find strange tracks, trees twisted in ways that shouldn't be possible. Then, one day, he went out on patrol and never came back. I listened, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. But why hasn't anyone done anything? The police, the military. Maggie let out a bitter laugh. Oh, they tried. But these things is smart. They know how to hide. And when they do show themselves, well, let's just say most people don't survive to report it. Those who do are usually dismissed as crazy. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. In it, a younger Maggie stood next to a man who I assumed was her brother. They were both smiling, standing in front of a ranger station. After Tom disappeared, I quit my job, sold everything I had, and came out here, been hunting them ever since. There's a few of us scattered around. We do what we can to keep them contained, to protect people who wander in unknowingly, like you. I felt a pang of guilt. I'm sorry. I had no idea. Maggie waved off my apology. Not your fault. But now that you know, you have a choice to make. You could run tomorrow, go back to your life, try to forget what you saw. Or what? I asked, already knowing the answer. Or you can stay, help us fight, it's dangerous, and there's a good chance you won't survive. But if we don't stop them, more people will die. I sat there in silence, contemplating her words. My old life seemed so distant now, so meaningless in the face of what I discovered. Could I really go back to that, knowing what was out here? As if in response to my thoughts, a howl echoed outside the cave. A sound so alien and terrifying that it made my blood run cold. Maggie was on her feet in an instant, rifle in hand, peering out of the cave entrance. They're hunting, she whispered. We're safe here for now, but come morning, Molly to move. I nodded, realizing my decision had already been made for me. There was no going back now. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every sound, every shadow made me jump. Maggie took the first watch, sitting near the entrance of the cave with her rifle across her lap. As I lay there on the hard cave floor, my mind raced with everything I'd learned. When Maggie woke me for my turn to keep watch, the sky outside was just beginning to lighten. She handed me her rifle, showing me how to use it quickly. Aim for the head or the heart, she said. Anywhere else, they'll just keep coming. As Maggie settled down to sleep, I sat at the cave entrance, my eyes scanning the forest. In a dim pre-dawn light, the woods looked different, sinister, alive in a way I'd never noticed before. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig set my nerves on edge. It was during those quiet hours that I truly began to process what had happened, what I'd seen. The world as I knew it had changed irrevocably. Those stirs were real, and they were hunting in our forests. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows through the trees, Maggie stirred. She joined me at the entrance, her eyes alert despite the lack of sleep. We need to move, she said. There's a cabin about 5 miles from here. We can resupply there and plan our next move. We packed quickly and silently, erasing all signs of our presence from the cave. As we stepped out into the morning light, Maggie paused, her hand on my arm. "Listen," she said, her voice low and serious. "What I'm about to tell you isn't easy to hear, but you need to know what we're up against." Over the next hour, as we hiked through the forest, Maggie filled me in on the truth. A truth so terrifying and unbelievable that part of me wanted to dismiss it as the ravings of a mad person. But after what I'd seen, I knew better. The creatures, the skinwalkers as Maggie called them, weren't just some undiscovered species. They were intelligent, organized, and they had a purpose. They were terraforming the forest, changing it to suit their needs. The twisted trees, the strange markings, it was all part of their plan. "We think they're preparing for an invasion," Maggie explained. "These woods, they're just the beachhead. If we don't stop them here, they'll spread. And once they reach the cities," she didn't need to finish the thoughts. I could imagine the carnage, the chaos that would ensue if these things made it to populated areas. "But why here?" I asked. "Why these woods?" Maggie shook her head. "We're not sure. Maybe it's the remoteness or something about the geology of the area. All we know is that this is where they chose to start, and this is where we have to stop them." As we walked, I noticed more signs of the skinwalker's presence. Strange markings on trees, areas where the underbrush had been cleared in unnatural patterns. It was like seeing the forest with new eyes, recognizing the alien influence that had taken root here. Suddenly, Maggie stopped, holding up a hand for silence. She cocked her head, listening intently. Then I heard it too. A low, guttural sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. "Run," Maggie whispered urgently. Now we took off through the forest, branches whipping in our faces as we ran. The sound behind us grew louder, accompanied by the crashing of undergrowth as something large moved through the trees. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but pure adrenaline kept me going. Maggie was just ahead of me, her backpack bouncing as she ran. She veered suddenly to the left, and I followed without question. We burst out of the tree line onto a rocky slope. Loose stones skittered under our feet as we scrambled upward. The howling behind us grew closer. "There," Maggie shouted, pointing to a narrow crevice in the rock face ahead. We reached the opening just as a massive shape erupted from the trees below. I caught a glimpse of matted fur, twisted limbs, and too many eyes before Maggie shoved me into the crevice. The opening was barely wide enough for us to squeeze through. We pushed deeper into the darkness, the sound of claws scraping on rock echoing behind us. After what felt like an eternity, the passage widened into a small cavern. Maggie fumbled in her pack and pulled out a flare, casting an eerie red glow over our surroundings. "We should be safe here for now," she panted. "They're too big to fit through that opening." As if to prove her wrong, a horrific screech echoed through the passage, followed by the sound of rock being torn apart. Maggie's eyes widened. "Shit," she muttered. "They're digging through. We need to find another way out." We searched the cavern frantically, the sounds of the creatures getting closer with each passing moment. Finally, I spotted a small opening near the top of the far wall. "There," I shouted, pointing. Maggie nodded. "You go first," she said. "I'll hold them off." I wanted to argue, but there was no time. I scrambled up the rocky wall, squeezing into the narrow passage. Behind me, I heard Maggie's rifle fire, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. I crawled through the tight passage, scraping my elbows and knees raw in the rough stone. Finally, I saw light ahead. With a final push, I emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking a steep valley. Moments later, Maggie squeezed out behind me, her face pale and streaked with dirt and blood. "Move," she yelled, shoving me along the ledge. We inched along the narrow path, pressed against the rock face. Below us, the valley floor was lost and misty. Above, the sky was turning orange with the setting sun. Just as we reached a wider part of the ledge, a clawed hand burst from the opening we'd just escaped from. Maggie raised her rifle, but before she could fire, the rock beneath her feet crumbled. I lunged for her, catching her arm as she fell. For a moment we hung there, me clinging to the ledge with one hand, Maggie dangling over the misty abyss below. "Let go," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "You have to warn the others, find the cabin, there's a radio." "No," I shouted, straining to pull her up, but I could feel my grip on the ledge weakening. In that moment, I made a choice. Using all my strength, I swung Maggie towards the ledge. She caught hold just as my fingers slipped. As I fell, I saw Maggie pull herself to safety. Then the mist swallowed me and everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was lying on a bed of moss surrounded by twisted trees that seemed to bend inward, creating a natural shelter. My body ached all over, but miraculously nothing seemed to be broken. As I sat up trying to orient myself, I realized something was different. The forest around me was silent, no birds, no insects, not even the rustle of wind through leaves. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then I saw it. A few feet away, half hidden by the gnarled roots of a massive tree, was a small, pulsing object. It looked like a seed pod of some kind, but it glowed with an otherworldly light. As I watched, the pod began to split open. Something inside moved, unfurling like a fern frond. But it wasn't a plant, it was something else, something that shouldn't exist in our world. In that moment I understood. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a rebirth. The skinwalkers weren't just changing our worlds, they were planting the seeds of their own. I knew then what I had to do. Maggie and the others could fight the creatures we could see, but this was the real threat. These seeds, these alien spores, they were the future the skinwalkers were planning. With shaking hands, I reached for my backpack, which had somehow stayed with me during the fall. Inside, I found my old Swiss Army knife, the one I joked wouldn't cut through warm butter. It would have to do. As I approached the pulsing seed pod, I heard movement in the forest around me. They were coming, the skinwalkers, drawn to the birth of one of their own. I need one chance, one opportunity to strike at the heart of their plans, to destroy their future before it could take root in our world. With a deep breath, I raised the knife and plunged it into the alien seed. The forest erupted into chaos. In the distance, I heard gunshots. Maggie and the others were still fighting, still trying to save a world that didn't even know it was under attack. As the alien substance oozed around my hand, burning like acid, I made a silent vow. I would survive this. I would find Maggie and the others, and together we would stop this invasion, no matter the cost. Because now I knew the truth. The real war wasn't just in these woods. It was everywhere, in every shadow, every quiet corner of the world. And it was just beginning. As consciousness faded once more, my last thought was of the life I'd left behind, the divorce, the mundane problems that had seemed so important just days ago. How trivial it all seemed now in the face of this cosmic horror. The world had changed, and so had I. When I wake up, if I wake up, I'll be ready. Ready to face the monsters in the dark. Ready to fight for a world that may never know how close it came to ending. This is my story, my warning. The skinwalkers are here, and they're hungry. It was 1997, rural Wyoming, 2 hours from Jackson Hole, and I was desperate for a break from my mundane routine. My name's Will Grassine, and for years I'd been grinding away at an office cubicle, a place where fluorescent lights sucked the life out of me like an overzealous vampire. It was that kind of soul-crushing boredom that led me to accept the invitation for a camping trip of a lifetime. My friend Dave had gotten into some outdoorsy kicks lately, so I figured why not. A weekend away from the office, the stress, and those darn emails. You know how it is. Dave was one of those guys who always got into new hobbies, hardcore. Last year it was deep-sea fishing, and before that he tried handcrafting knives. The guy couldn't stick to one thing, but he swore up and down that this wilderness thing had finally clicked. "Will, you've got to come," Dave insisted over the phone. "This place is untouched, man. No tourists, no rangers, just pure wilderness." I should have questioned why no one knew about it, but at that moment, all I could think about was escaping the suffocating confines of my cubicle. "Right," I said, surprising myself. I mean, Dave's excitement was palpable, even through the phone. "Great, I'll pick you up Friday after work. Pack light but warm, and, well, this is gonna be amazing." As I hung up, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. It had been years since I'd gone camping, and even then it was in a crowded campground with amenities. This was different. This was real wilderness. But how bad could it be? The rest of the week crawled by, each tick of the office clock a reminder of the adventure to come. By the time Friday rolled around, I was practically bouncing out of my seat. As soon as the clock struck 5, I was out the door. My hastily packed bag slung over my shoulder. Dave's truck pulled up right on time, loaded down with gear. He hopped out, grinning from ear to ear. "Ready for this, city boy?" I tossed my bag in the back, eyeing the pile of equipment. "I think the question is, are you ready? Looks like you packed for a small army." Dave laughed, slapping me on the back. "Better to have it and not need it, right? Trust me, where we're going, we'll want to be prepared." As we pulled away from my apartment, leaving the city behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was going to be more than I bargained for. But isn't that what I wanted? An escape from the ordinary. Little did I know, as the skyscrapers faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by endless stretches of wilderness, that this weekend would change everything. Some escapes, as I was about to learn, come at a terrifying price. The drive was long, winding through landscapes that grew increasingly wild and unfamiliar. We passed the occasional ranch, but soon even those signs of civilization disappeared. An hour in, Dave turned onto a dirt path so narrow it felt like we were driving straight into the wilderness. "And I guess, mon bro, you sure this is the right way?" I asked, peering out the window at the encroaching forest. Dave nodded, his eyes focused on the rough path ahead. "Positive guy at the bait shop told me about this place, said it's a local secret." I never felt so cut off from civilization. The further we went, the more claustrophobic the trees became, pressing in on all sides. The truck jostled and bounced, its suspension groaning in protest. Just when I thought we couldn't go any further, Dave stopped the truck. "This is it," he announced. Killing the engine. I stepped out, stretching my cramped legs. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and something else, something wild and unfamiliar. Dave got out and pointed down a steep incline. "See that spot?" We hiked down there, followed the creek, and well set up camp near the clearing. I eyed the descent warily. "That's quite a hike." Dave was already shouldering his pack. "Come on, city boy. Where's your sense of adventure?" Grumbling, I hefted my own bag. It was heavier than I expected, and I silently cursed my lack of preparation. Dave had packed most of the gear: tents, freeze-dried meals, bear spray, because apparently Wyoming. And the brand new rifle he insisted was only for emergencies. "If a man gets into trouble," I joked, "you'll be the guy calling for an airlift while sipping a cold one in the tent." Dave's laugh echoed through the trees, seeming to bounce back at us from all directions. "No cell service out here, buddy. We're on our own." Those words should have been my first warning. The hike was brutal. What looked manageable from above quickly turned into a grueling ordeal. The terrain was rough, all loose rocks and hidden roots waiting to trip us up. Dave powered ahead, seemingly unbothered by the weight of his pack or the difficulty of the descent. I, on the other hand, was silently cursing my desk job with every step. An hour in, I called for a break. Sweat soaked my shirt, and my legs felt like jelly. Dave looked back, a hint of concern in his eyes. "You okay, Will?" "We're about halfway there." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without gasping. As I caught my breath, I looked around. The forest was dense, with old-growth trees towering above us. Shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, illuminating motes of dust and pollen in the air. It was beautiful in a primal sort of way. But there was something else too, a stillness that felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but a nagging sense of unease began to creep over me. "Dave," I said, my breath finally steadying, "have you noticed how quiet it is? Not birds, no insects, nothing." He paused, cocking his head to listen. For a moment his brow furrowed, but then he shrugged. "Probably just the time of day. Come on, we should keep moving. I don't want to set up camp in the dark." I nodded, pushing myself to my feet. But as we continued our descent, that sense of wrongness grew. The silence pressed in around us, broken only by our labored breathing and the crunch of our boots on the forest floor. By the time we reached the creek, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. Dave consulted his map, then pointed downstream. The clearing should be about a mile that way. "We're almost there." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. We followed the creek, its gentle burble the only sound in the oppressive quiet of the forest. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig under our feet sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. Finally, just as the last rays of sunlight were fading, we reached the clearing. It was a wide grassy patch bordered by thick woods and the river that trickled gently nearby. Under different circumstances, it might have been idyllic. Dave slapped my back, grinning. "Perfect, right?" I managed a weak smile, dropping my pack with a groan of relief. "Yeah, perfect." As we began to set up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just stepped into something far beyond our understanding. The adventure I'd been craving suddenly felt a lot less appealing. Little did I know the true horror was yet to begin. By sunset, we had the tents up, a fire roaring, and a couple of beers popped open. I was finally starting to relax, the physical exhaustion of the hike giving way to a sense of accomplishment. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. "Hey, Dave," I called out, unable to resist the urge to joke. "I'm only out here to make sure you don't get eaten by a grizzly." He laughed, but it was a moment, just a flicker, when his expression changed. It was as if he was about to say something and then thought better of it. And before I could question it, he tossed me a packet of freeze-dried spaghetti. "Dinner time, chef. Hope you're hungry." We had our meals in comfortable silence. The fire crackled merrily. I had to admit, despite the less than gourmet offerings, there was something satisfying about eating outdoors. As the stars began to emerge, twinkling through gaps in the canopy, I found myself feeling genuinely content. But as night fully settled in, that nagging sense of unease returned. The silence, which had been merely odd during the day, now felt oppressive. No owls hooted, no insects chirped, just the soft whisper of wind through leaves and the gentle babble of the creek. I was about to mention it to Dave when I noticed something else, a faint sound in the distance. At first, I thought it might be a deer or some other animal moving through the underbrush. But the longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't moving like any animal I knew. The steps were slow, deliberate, almost dragging. "Dave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You hear that?" He stared into the fire for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, it's nothing, man. Probably just an animal." But I knew Dave well enough to recognize when he was putting on a brave face. The Dave I knew would have jumped at the chance to show off his outdoor knowledge, to explain what kind of animal it might be and how to handle an encounter. This brush-off only heightened my anxiety. As the night wore on, the sound continued. Sometimes it seemed to fade into the distance, only to return closer than before. Each time it neared, I felt my heart rate spike. My palms grew sweaty despite the cool night air. Dave kept glancing into the trees, his face unreadable in the flickering firelight. Neither of us wanted to be the first to admit how unsettled we were. Finally, after what felt like hours of this nerve-wracking game of auditory hide-and-seek, Dave stood up. "We should probably turn in. It's going to be a long day tomorrow." I nodded, relieved at the prospect of retreating to the relative safety of my tent. But as I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there was watching, waiting. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept waking up, convinced I heard something creeping closer. At one point, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move outside my tent, a tall, unnaturally thin silhouette cast by the dying embers of our fire. But I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. It was during one of these fitful bouts of sleep that I heard it. His voice, barely a whisper, just outside my tent. "Will, come out here." I sat up, heart pounding. "What is it?" I asked. "Come out here, man. Now." Something in his tone sent a jolt of fear through me. This wasn't a casual call to check out the stars or share a midnight snack. This was urgent, tinged with an edge of panic that made my blood run cold. With trembling hands, I grabbed my jacket and slipped out of the tent. The sight that greeted me would haunt my nightmares for years to come. I emerged from my tent to find Dave standing by the smoldering remains of our fire, the rifle clutched tightly in his hands. His face was pale, his eyes wide and darting between the trees surrounding our clearing. The moonlight cast everything in an eerie, silvery glow, turning familiar shapes into looming, sinister shadows. "What the hell's going on?" I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness of the night. Dave didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised a trembling hand, pointing toward a dense patch of woods to our right. "There's something out there," he finally said, his voice barely audible. I followed his gaze, squinting into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but the vague outlines of trees and underbrush. But then, as my eyes adjusted, I caught a glimpse of movement. Something shifted in the shadows, something tall and unnaturally thin. My first instinct was to question if Dave had been drinking more than I thought. But the look in his eyes, the way his knuckles were wide around the rifle stock, told me he was dead serious. We both stood there, listening intently. And then I heard it again, that dragging sound closer this time, slow, deliberate, then a deep thud like something heavy being dropped. I felt my entire body go rigid with fear. Dave raised the rifle, stepping toward the edge of the clearing. "Stay behind me," he whispered. I didn't argue for the first time in my life. I was glad someone had brought a gun on a camping trip. We stood there, the dying embers of our fire crackling softly behind us as that sound kept moving closer, inch by agonizing inch. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. Blood rushed to my ears, almost drowning out the sound of twigs snapping under an unseen weight. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe for it to just turn around and go away, leaving us with nothing but a spooky story to tell when we got back to civilization. But then I saw it. Something moved in the trees, a shape too tall to be human, too thin to be a bear. And then it moved. And then it moved like any animal I'd ever seen. There was a strange, unnatural grace to its motion, like it was gliding between the trees rather than walking. In the dim light, I caught glimpses of pale, almost translucent skin stretched tight over an emaciated frame. Dave aimed the rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. Though Deframi could fire, the thing charged. I've never seen anything move so fast. One second it was in the trees, the next it was on top of us. I caught a brief glimpse of a face, if you could call it that. Sunken, eyeless sockets, a mouth too wide, filled with needle-like teeth. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but in that moment survival instinct took over. Behind me I heard the crack of the rifle, followed by a sickening crunch and then Dave's scream. A scream that cut off abruptly, replaced by a wet, tearing sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. I didn't stop running until my legs gave out somewhere along the creek. I fell, gasping for air, my lungs burning and my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I lay there in the mud, trying to convince myself that I'd wake up and this would all be some messed up dream. But the cold water soaking through my clothes, the sting of branches that had whipped my face as I ran, the metallic taste of fear in my mouth, it was all too real. This was happening, and Dave... Oh God, I don't know how long I lay there, shivering and whimpering like a child, but eventually I knew I had to go back. I couldn't just leave Dave. I couldn't just run away without knowing. With legs that felt like lead and a heart heavy with dread, I began the slow trek back to our campsite. Each step was a battle against every instinct, screaming at me to run and get as far away from this place as possible. But I pressed on, driven by a mix of guilt, loyalty, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, Dave had survived. As I neared the clearing, that hope died. The campsite was a scene of carnage. Our tents were shredded, supplies scattered everywhere. The rifle lay broken on the ground, bent at an unnatural angle, and there where Dave had stood was a dark stain soaking into the grass, but Dave himself was gone. Instead, there were drag marks leading into the trees as if something had pulled him away. I stood there paralyzed with horror, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing, and then I saw it again. At the edge of the clearing, just watching. Tall, thin, skin pale and tight, like something that had been left out in the sun too long. Those empty eye sockets seemed to bore into me, that too wide mouth curving into what might have been a smile. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that I was looking at something that should not exist, something that defied everything I thought I knew about the world. I grabbed what I could, my bag, some food, anything that wasn't too heavy, and I ran. I didn't stop until I reached Dave's truck, the keys still in the ignition where we'd left them. As I sped down that narrow dirt road, branches whipping against the windows. I kept expecting to see that thing, and I drove like a man possessed, the truck bouncing and skidding along the narrow dirt road. Every shadow seemed to loom with menace, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of panic through my system. I kept expecting to see that thing in my rearview mirror, its impossible form loping after the truck with inhuman speed. Then nothing followed, at least nothing I could see. When I finally hit paved road, I nearly wept with relief. The first hints of dawn were just beginning to lighten the eastern sky as I roared into the nearest town, a small sleepy place called Millbrook. I screeched to a halt outside the sheriff's office, stumbling out of the truck with legs that felt like jelly. My appearance must have been quite a sight, muddy, scratched, and wild-eyed with panic. The deputy on duty took one look at me and immediately called for the sheriff. Sheriff Hank Brewer was a grizzled man in his late 50s with a weathered face that had seen its share of trouble. And even he looked taken aback by my frantic babbling account of what had happened. "Slow down, son," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Start from the beginning. Where's your friend?" I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "We were camping out in the woods about 2 hours from here. Something attacked us. Dave. I think it got Dave." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Something, what kind of something bad? I shook my head vehemently. No, not a bear. It was... I don't know what it was, tall and thin. It moved so fast. Sheriff Brewer exchanged a look with his deputy. I could see the skepticism in their eyes, the unspoken assumption that I was either drunk, high, or simply out of my mind. "All right," the sheriff said finally. "I'll send a team out to check the area. Can you show us on a map where you were camping? I nodded, relieved that they were at least willing to investigate. As I pointed out the location on their map, I couldn't help but notice the sheriff's frown deepen. That's mighty remote territory, he muttered. Not many folks go out that way. A chill ran down my spine at his words. How many others had ventured into those woods, never to return? The next few hours passed in a blur. I gave a formal statement, answered countless questions, and tried not to flinch every time I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. They took samples of the blood on my clothes, photographed my scratches and bruises. By mid-afternoon, the search team had returned. Their report was grim. They had found our campsite, just as I described it. Torn tents, scattered supplies, signs of a violent struggle. But of Dave, there was no sign. Just those drag marks leading off into the dense underbrush before disappearing entirely. Could have been a bear, one of the deputies suggested. Might have dragged the body off to its den. But I could see in Sheriff Brewer's eyes that he didn't quite believe it. There was something in the way he looked at me, a mix of pity and... Was that fear? Well, keep searching, he assured me. But son, you should go home, get some rest. We'll call you if we find anything. I wanted to argue to insist on joining the search, but exhaustion was catching up with me, the adrenaline that had kept me going finally wearing off. I nodded mutely, allowing them to drive me to a small motel on the outskirts of town. As I lay in the lumpy bed staring at the water-stained ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whatever I had seen out there in those woods, whatever had taken Dave, it wasn't something that could be explained away by conventional means. And deep down, I knew that no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to forget, a part of me would always be back in that clearing, facing a horror beyond imagination. The days that followed were a nightmare of questioning, doubt, and growing paranoia. I stayed in Millbrook, unable to bring myself to return to my normal life while Dave was still missing. The local authorities continued their search, combing the woods with dogs and helicopters, but found nothing beyond what we'd already discovered. As the days stretched into a week, I could sense the investigation losing steam. The prevailing theory among the search team was that Dave had been attacked by a bear or mountain lion, his body dragged off and consumed. It was a tragedy, they said, but not unheard of in these parts. But I knew better. The image of that thing, tall and impossibly thin, moving with an unnatural grace, was burned into my memory. No bear or mountain lion could explain what I'd seen. It was on the 8th day that I met her. I was sitting in the local diner, pushing eggs around my plate and trying to ignore the whispers and stares from the locals when she slid into the booth across from me. "Will Gorson?" she asked. No, it wasn't really a question. I looked up, startled. She was in her mid-30s, with sharp green eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Something about her demeanor screamed authority. "I'm Agent Cassidy Walsh, FBI," she said, flashing a badge. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about what happened in the woods." My heart rate picked up. The FBI, this was more than just a missing person case now. Over the next hour, I recounted my story yet again, trying to include every detail I could remember. Agent Walsh listened intently, her face betraying nothing. "Mr. Garson," she said when I'd finished, "have you ever heard of the Blackwood disappearances?" I shook my head, a sense of unease growing in the pit of my stomach. Over the past 50 years, there have been a series of unexplained disappearances in this region. Hikers, campers, even a few locals, all vanishing without a trace in those same woods where you and your friend were camping. She pulled out a file, spreading photos across the table. I saw faces, men, women, even a few children, all smiling at the camera, unaware of the fate that awaited them. In most cases, no bodies were ever found, but a few. She hesitated, then pulled out another photo. I recoiled in horror. It was a crime scene photo showing a man's body or what was left of it. The corpse was emaciated, as if every ounce of fat and muscle had been sucked out, leaving only skin stretched tight over bone. But the face was frozen in a rictus of terror, mouth open in a silent scream. "This is John Oakwood," Agent Walsh said quietly, "found 3 years ago about 10 miles from where you were camping. Official cause of death was listed as animal attack, but you don't believe that. I finished for her." She shook her head. "No, I don't. I don't think you do either." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. What do you think it is?" Agent Walsh leaned in, her voice low. "I don't know, but I've been tracking these cases for years, and I believe there's something out there, something that defies conventional explanation." A chill ran down my spine. Part of me wanted to dismiss her words as the ravings of a conspiracy theorist, but I knew what I had seen. And now, knowing I wasn't alone, that others had encountered this thing, what could we do? I asked. Agent Walsh's eyes glinted with determination. "We find it, and we stop it. But I need your help, Mr. Gorson. You're the first person to encounter this thing and live to tell about it. You're our best chance at understanding what we're dealing with." I hesitated. The thought of going back into those woods, of potentially facing that horror again, made my blood run cold. But then I thought of Dave, all the others who had disappeared. If that thing's still out there waiting for its next victim. I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Whatever it takes." Agent Walsh nodded, a grim smile on her face. "Good, because I have a feeling this is just the beginning." As we left the diner, planning our next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were embarking on something far beyond our understanding. But I also felt a spark of hope. Whatever was out there, whatever had taken Dave, it wasn't invincible. And now, it wasn't just hunting us. We were hunting it. The preparation for our return to the woods was meticulous. Agent Walsh assembled a small team herself, me, a local guide named Tom who knew the area like the back of his hand, and a cryptozoologist named Dr. Elena Rodriguez. We spent days poring over maps, studying the patterns of disappearances, and gathering equipment. Remember, Agent Walsh briefed us the night before we set out. Our primary goal is to gather evidence. We're not here to confront this thing, whatever it is we observe, document, and get out. Understood? We all nodded, but I couldn't help feeling a sense of dread. The thought of going back into those woods made my palms sweat and my heart race. But I knew I had to do this for Dave, for all the others who never came back. We set out at dawn, the morning mist still clinging to the trees as we made our way along the now familiar dirt road. This time we parked further away, not wanting to alert whatever was out there to our presence. The hike was grueling, made worse by the weight of our packs and the constant vigilance required. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system, but nothing appeared. We reached the clearing where Dave and I had camped by mid-afternoon. The site had been largely reclaimed by nature in the weeks since the attack, but I could still see signs of what had happened. A scrap of tent fabric here, a bent tent peg there. Dr. Rodriguez immediately set to work, taking samples of soil and vegetation. Tom and Agent Walsh began setting up our surveillance equipment, motion-activated cameras, infrared sensors, audio recorders. I stood at the edge of the clearing, my eyes scanning the tree line, half expecting to see that tall, thin figure emerge at any moment. As night fell, we retreated to our camp a short distance from the original site. We took turns keeping watch, each of us armed with night vision goggles and a high-powered rifle, but the night passed uneventfully. The forest around us was silent, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of a small animal. It was on the second day that things began to change. We were reviewing the footage from our cameras when Dr. Rodriguez called us over. Excitement in her voice. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a blurry image on her laptop screen. This was captured around 3 a.m. We crowded around, squinting at the grainy night vision footage, and there it was, a figure tall and impossibly thin, moving at the edge of the frame. It was only visible for a second before disappearing into the trees, but it was unmistakably the same creature I had seen that night with Dave. My God, Tom whispered, his face pale. What is that thing? Dr. Rodriguez was practically vibrating with excitement. I've never seen anything like it. The proportions are all wrong for any known species, and the way it moves, I nodded, a chill running down my spine. It's not natural. It's like it's gliding. Agent Walsh's face was grim. At least now we have proof. It's real, and it's out there. We spent the rest of the day analyzing the footage, setting up more cameras, trying to predict where the creature might appear next. As night fell again, there was a palpable tension in the air. We all knew that our presence hadn't gone unnoticed. Whatever this thing was, it knew we were here. It was just before midnight when we heard it. That same slow, dragging sound that had haunted my nightmares for weeks. We all froze, eyes wide in the darkness, hands tightening on our weapons. And then we saw it, at the edge of our camp, just beyond the reach of our firelight. Tall, thin, its skin pale and almost translucent in the moonlight. Those empty eye sockets seemed to stare right through us, that too wide mouth curved in what might have been a smile. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. We were face to face with something that shouldn't exist. Something that defied everything we thought we knew about the natural world. And then it attacked. What followed was a chaos of gunfire, screams, and frantic movement. The creature moved with impossible speed, seeming to be everywhere at once. Tom was the first to fall, swept off his feet by a limb that seemed to stretch and bend in ways that made my mind recoil. Agent Walsh opened fire. The muzzle flashes illuminated the clearing, casting stark, terrifying bursts. I saw bullets impact the creature, but it barely seemed to notice, continuing its relentless advance. Dr. Rodriguez was frantically trying to capture footage on her camera, her scientific curiosity warring with her survival instinct. "We're not to document this," she shouted over the gunfire. "The world needs to know." Her words cut off in a strangled scream as the creature's arm shot out, wrapping around her waist and yanking her into the darkness. I fired wildly in the direction she had disappeared, but I knew it was too late. "Fall back!" Agent Walsh yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the trees. "We need to regroup." We ran, crashing through the underbrush, with sounds of pursuit close behind. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. We burst out of the tree line onto a rocky outcropping overlooking a steep ravine. "Dead end," I gasped, turning to face the woods we had just fled. Agent Walsh stood beside me, her rifle raised. "Then this is where we make our stand." For a moment all was quiet. Then the trees at the edge of the clearing began to sway, parting to reveal our pursuer. In the moonlight, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was vaguely humanoid, but stretched and distorted in ways that defied anatomy. Its limbs were too long, too flexible, ending in hands with elongated fingers tipped with wicked claws. The face was a nightmare, no eyes, just empty sockets that somehow still managed to convey a sense of hunger. The mouth was a gash filled with needle-like teeth, stretching impossibly wide as it approached. "What are you?" Agent Walsh demanded, her voice surprisingly steady. "What do you want?" The creature paused, cocking its head as if considering the question. And then, to my horror, it spoke. The voice was a raspy whisper, like dry leaves scraping against stone. "Hunger," it said. "Always hunger." It lunged forward with blinding speed. Agent Walsh fired, bullets tearing into the creature's flesh, but it didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. I saw its claws flash in the moonlight, heard Walsh's scream of pain, and then I was alone, face to face with the thing from my nightmares. I backed up, feeling the edge of the cliff behind me, nowhere left to run. The creature advanced slowly now, savoring the moment. And that toe-wide mouth stretched into what I could only describe as a grin. You escaped me once, Rast, not again. In that moment, staring into those empty sockets, I made a decision. I wouldn't die like this, I wouldn't become another mysterious disappearance. If I was going down, I was taking this thing with me. With a yell that was equal parts terror and defiance, I charged forward. The creature, surprised by my sudden attack, hesitated for just a moment. It was all I needed. I slammed into it with all my strength, feeling its cold, clammy flesh against mine as we both went over the edge of the cliff. We fell, tumbling through the air. I heard the creature's inhuman shriek of rage, felt its claws raking at me, and then there was impact, pain, and darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was lying at the bottom of the ravine, my body a mass of pain. Somehow, miraculously, I was alive. Of the creature, there was no sign. It took me hours to climb out of that ravine. Every movement agony. When I finally reached the top, I found Agent Walsh. She was badly injured but alive, having managed to drag herself away from the site of the attack. We found no trace of Tom and Dr. Rodriguez. The official report claimed it was a bear attack. Agent Walsh's superiors buried her findings, dismissed the video evidence as a hoax. The world went on, unaware of the horror that lurks in those remote woods. But I know the truth. I've seen it with my own eyes, felt its cold flesh, heard its voice. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I could hear that rasping voice whispering hunger in the darkness of my room. We never found Dave's body or those of Tom and Dr. Rodriguez. The authorities eventually closed the case, chalking it up to a tragic animal attack. Agent Walsh was reassigned her reports buried deep in some government archive. As for me, I tried to move on. I left my job, moved to a bustling city where the constant noise and light helped keep the memories at bay. But I could never fully escape what happened in those woods. I've spent years researching, trying to make sense of what we encountered. I found whispers of similar creatures in folklore from around the world. Wendigos, skinwalkers, things that lurk in the dark places of the earth, feeding on the unwary. But nothing quite matches what we saw. Sometimes I wonder if it survived our fall, if it's still out there hunting in those remote woods. Other times I convince myself it was all a hallucination, a product of fear and isolation. But then I look at the scars on my body, feel the ache in my bones that never quite went away, and I know the truth. There are things in this world that defy explanation, horrors that lurk just beyond the edge of firelight. And once you've seen them, truly seen them, you can never unsee them. I don't go camping anymore. I avoid forests and remote places, but sometimes when I look out my window at night and see the distant tree line, I can't help but wonder, is it still out there? Is it hungry? And in those moments, I remember Dave's last words to me before everything went to hell. "This is going to be amazing," he had said. He was right, in a way. It was amazing, terrifying, life-altering, but amazing nonetheless. We had touched the unknown, peered behind the veil of reality, and seen something that shouldn't exist. I had never spoken publicly about what happened. Who would believe me? But I'm writing this down now as a record, a warning perhaps. To those who seek adventure in the wild places of the world, be careful, be vigilant. Because sometimes the greatest horror isn't what you can see, it's what you can. If you had told me a year ago that a simple hike could shatter everything I thought I knew about the world, I would have laughed in your face. Back then my life revolved around the predictable rhythms of teaching high school biology in Flagstaff, Arizona. When I wasn't grading lab reports or prepping dissection specimens, I could usually be found exploring the majestic landscapes that surrounded my high desert hometown. Growing up, the Red Rock Canyons and ponderosa forests of northern Arizona were my playground. Every summer, my dad would take me backpacking along the remote trails that snaked through places like Sycamore Canyon and Kendrick Mountain. He taught me how to read topo maps, identify animal tracks, and respect the raw power of nature. By the time I headed off to NAU for my biology degree, the high country felt as familiar to me as my own backyard. Those wilderness skills served me well in my 20s when I'd spend every school break trekking iconic trails like the Arizona Trail and Hermit Loop. But as the responsibilities of adulthood set in, a steady teaching job, a mortgage, a serious girlfriend, my trips became shorter and less frequent. A day hike squeezed in between grading marathons, a weekend escape to recharge before diving back into the classroom. That's probably why I jumped at the chance for one last big adventure before the end of that fateful summer. Larson, my best friend since our undergrad days, had just scored a plum research gig studying volcano hazards in Hawaii. He wanted to get in a real hike before leaving Arizona behind for the jungles of the Big Island. Come on, sigh, he'd cajoled over beers at our favorite Flagstaff brewery. When's the last time we did more than chase our tails on Mount Eldon? I'm talking a legit backpacking trip like the old days. He was right. It had been ages since we tested ourselves against a challenging trail, watched the sun set over an impossibly vast desert, or slept under a sky riddled with stars. The thought of recapturing a piece of our younger, wilder selves held an undeniable appeal. So we started planning, flying over maps and trail guides. We wanted something remote and strenuous, the kind of hike you really had to earn. Orson, ever the geology nerd, was drawn to the volcanic landscapes of the San Francisco peaks, but I craved the twisting sandstone canyons and lush riparian zones of the Mogollon Rim country. In the end, we settled on a compromise. A 3-day, 20-mile loop in a seldom-traveled corner of Oak Creek Canyon. The route promised towering cliffs, seasonal waterfalls, and near-total isolation, a hidden gem that few casual hikers ever experienced. I ventured into parts of that wilderness before, always with a sense of delicious trepidation. There was something about its scale and emptiness that made you feel small and utterly alone. If only I'd known then how prescient that feeling would prove to be. How a trip meant to rekindle old friendships and a love of wild places would become a waking nightmare. How the very canyons I'd romanticized as an escape from everyday life would nearly become my grave. When Olsen and I shouldered our packs at the trailhead that crisp September morning, our minds were only on the adventure ahead. The air smelled of sun-warmed pine and distant wood smoke. The aspens just starting to hint at their autumnal golds. We set off down the red dirt path, our boots kicking up puffs of dust, our voices bright with anticipation, towards something ancient and hungry, waiting in the depths of the canyon. The first few miles passed in a blur of easy camaraderie, the kind born of countless shared experiences. Orson and I fell into the familiar rhythms of the trail, our strides matching as we reminisced about past hikes and caught up on recent life developments. He regaled me with stories about his upcoming Hawaii job, learning to surf, researching lava flows, acclimating to island life. I fell in on the ups and downs of my latest batch of students, the minor victories and daily frustrations that come with teaching. As we hiked deeper into the canyon system, the towering sandstone walls closed in around us, their striped faces glowing in shades of ochre and rust beneath the midday sun. The well-maintained trail of the first few miles gave way to a fainter path, then to an intermittent game trail that threaded between car-sized boulders and dense stands of manzanita. A few times we had to backtrack or scramble up slick rock slopes to regain the route, as the way forward became obscured by a landscape that seemed to fold in on itself. Despite the navigational challenges, I reveled in the increasing sense of isolation, the feeling of being swallowed up by a wilderness still untamed. Out here, beneath the dizzying expanse of turquoise sky, my worries and routines from everyday life began to fade, replaced by an invigorating sense of self-reliance. Every sweaty mile that put distance between myself and the trailhead felt like a minor victory, a testament to resilience in the face of an indifferent landscape. We stopped for lunch on a sun-warmed ledge overlooking a dizzying drop-off, our feet dangling over 1,000 feet of empty air. Turkey sandwiches had never tasted so good. The simple act of refueling was imbued with the primal satisfaction of knowing we'd earned it. As we ate, a pair of ravens rode the updrafts along the cliff face below, their guttural croaks echoing off the canyon walls. "No, I'm only gonna miss this," Orson said, gesturing expansively at the wild tableau before us. The canyon country, there was just something about the scale of it, it makes you feel small in the best possible way. I nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. It's a good reminder of our place in the world. Out here, we're just passing through, same as everything else. We lingered there a while, soaking in the warm light and companionable silence. When we finally shouldered our packs again, it was with a touch of reluctance, an unspoken wish to make the moment last. But the trail beckoned, a serpentine path winding ever deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the canyon. As the afternoon wore on, subtle changes crept into the landscape around us. The once familiar vegetation of pinyon pine and juniper gave way to gnarled gamble oak and unfamiliar thickets of wispy blue-green shrubs. The clear piping song of canyon wrens faded, replaced by an eerie quiet broken only by the occasional gust of wind keening through the rockscape. Even the quality of the light seemed to shift, the rich golds and crimson of earlier bleeding into a flat, lurid crimson that stained the cliffs like old blood. I tried to shake off the growing sense of unease, chalking it up to end-of-day fatigue and the unfamiliarity of our surroundings. But as we rounded a bend in the canyon, something caught my eye that made my steps falter. There, in a patch of soft sand beneath a weathered sandstone overhang, was a set of tracks unlike any I'd seen before. Roughly circular, with splayed toes tipped in vicious-looking claws, they were at once reptilian and strangely humanoid. Each print was nearly as long as my boot, suggesting a creature of considerable size. "Orson, check this out," I called, kneeling for a closer look. "What do you make of these?" He joined me, his brow furrowing as he studied the bizarre markings. We've never seen anything like it. They almost look like dinosaur tracks or something. We both knew that was impossible, but as we followed the trail of prints to where they disappeared into a jumble of house-sized boulders, an icy trickle of apprehension ran down my spine. Something about those tracks felt deeply wrong, as if they belonged to a creature that couldn't exist. Unnerved, we decided to make camp early, choosing a defensible spot beneath a rocky overhang with clear sightlines in all directions. As we went through the familiar motions of pitching the tent and building a small fire, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking our every move from the deepening shadows. That night, as the eerie silence of the canyon pressed in around us, I dreamed of ancient things stirring in the dark heart of the wilderness, of primordial shapes slipping through the crevices in reality, drawn to the scent of warm blood and pounding hearts. Little did I know the nightmare was only beginning. I awoke with a start, heart pounding, unsure what had torn me from sleep. The tent was pitch black, the only sound Orson's steady breathing beside me. But as I lay there, trying to slow my racing pulse, I heard it again. A sound that made my blood run cold. It was a voice, distant and distorted as if filtered through fathoms of murky water. But there was no mistaking the words, spoken in a ghastly parody of Orson's cheerful baritone, "Silas, Silas, come out and play." I sat bolt upright, hands scrambling for my headlamp. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the tense, cramped interior. Wilson's sleeping face, the nylon walls fluttering lightly in the night breeze. Nothing out of place, no sign of intrusion. Heart still hammering, I slipped on my boots and unzipped the tent flap, needing to reassure myself that it had only been a dream. The night air was cold and still, the moonless sky, a vault of stars stretching from horizon to horizon. I had played my light over the slick rock slopes and skeletal junipers surrounding our little camp, half expecting to see some malevolent shape crouched in the shadows. But there was nothing, only the silent, sleeping wilderness and the hollow rushing of wind through the canyon. Feeling slightly foolish, I ducked back into the tent and tried to chalk the experience up to trail fatigue and an overactive imagination. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it did, it was shot through with restless dreams of being stalked through an endless, thirsty landscape. Morning brought a measure of relief, the night's phantoms dispelled by the prosaic routines of breaking camp and hitting the trail. Watson, if he heard anything in the small hours, made no mention of it, his demeanor as chipper as ever as we set off into the winding heart of the canyon system. But as the day wore on, a sense of disquiet crept back in. As persistent as the shadow at noon, the terrain grew increasingly strange and unfamiliar. The once recognizable desert flora giving way to twisted, stunted trees and drifts of ash-gray scrub that seemed to move and rustle in the corners of my vision. The air felt heavy and oppressive, burdened with a sour, metallic tang that coated the back of my throat. Even the sky above seemed subtly wrong. The blob bleached out to a sickly, anemic gray reminiscent of old bones. Clouds massed on the horizon, bruised, dark, and swollen, promising a storm, though the weather report had predicted clear skies. Is it just me, or does something feel about this place? Orson asked, voicing the unease that had been growing in my own mind. I know what you mean, I replied, scanning the alien landscape for any signs of threat. It's like we've crossed into a different world. As if to punctuate my words, the sudden gust of wind came swirling down the canyon, carrying with it a flurry of dead leaves and a sound that made my skin crawl. It was a high, thin, wailing, almost like a human scream that seemed to go on far longer than any earthly lungs could sustain. We froze, exchanging a wide-eyed glance as the awful noise faded into the unnatural silence. Please tell me that was just the wind, Wilson whispered. Before I could respond, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Something was moving along the ridgeline above us, a dark bipedal shape that seemed to melt in and out of the shadows cast by the gathering thunderheads. It was too far away to make out details, but something about the way it moved, a liquid, boneless grace, filled me with a primal revulsion. We need to get out of here, I heard myself say, my voice sounding thin and far away to my own ears. Now, but even as we quickened our pace, scanning desperately for any sign of a way out of the canyon, I knew in my bones that it was too late. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was overwhelming now, a physical pressure squeezing the breath from my lungs. The attack when it came was so sudden and savage that I had no time to react. One moment, Orson was a few paces ahead of me, scouting for a place to make camp for the night. The next thing was gone, snatched sideways into the scrub by something I couldn't quite see, just a blur of mottled hide and cruel, glinting claws. His scream cut off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Hard in my throat, I crashed into the brush after him, heedless of the branches that tore at my skin. But there was no sign of my friend, only a trail of broken foliage and a few splashes of blood black against the pale earth. Fighting down waves of horror and disbelief, I spun in a circle, searching desperately for any sign of the creature or its captive. That's when I saw it, lit by a flash of distant lightning, a hulking, misshapen form crouched atop a nearby ridgeline. Orson's limp form dangling from one taloned hand. As I watched in numb, transfixed horror, the thing raised its head and looked directly at me. Even from a distance, I could feel the malevolent weight of that gaze, sense the ancient hunger that pulsed behind those liquid, unblinking eyes. Then, quick as a swooping owl, it turned and banded away, vanishing into the gathering gloom with its grisly prize. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed it was a flash of something pale and fluttering caught in its free hand. Orson's bandana snatched from his head like a trophy. In that moment, I knew two things with a desperate, sinking certainty. The first was that my friend was almost certainly dead, or worse. The second was that the creature would be coming back for me, and that if I wanted to survive, I needed to run and keep running until I escaped this nightmare canyon or collapsed trying, terror lending my feet wings. I fled back the way we come, chased by the rising boom of thunder and the unearthly, ululating cries that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As night fell like an axe blade over the desert, I ran, the taste of fear bitter on my tongue. And behind me, never far behind, I could feel the presence of the thing in the dark, pacing me, playing with me, secure in the knowledge that there was no escape, that the hunt had only just begun. I ran until my lungs burned and my muscles screamed. A headlong flight through a landscape turned alien and hostile. The thunder rolled almost continuously now, great booming peals that shook the earth and made my teeth ache. Rain lashed down in icy sheets, plastering my hair to my skull and turning the sandy washes into torrents of rust-red water. But even as the storm raged around me, I could sense the thing behind me, never far away, matching me stride for stride with its inhuman endurance. I caught snatches of it in the lightning flashes, a glimpse of mottled fur, a flash of dripping claws, a glint of eyes that burned with a feral, ravenous glow. I stumbled onward, half blind with terror and exhaustion, no longer sure if I was running towards safety or deeper into the monster's lair. The towering walls of the canyon reared up on either side, blocking out the sky until I felt like a rat in a maze, scrabbling desperately for an exit that didn't exist. When the end came, it was almost a relief. I bossed out of a narrow defile to find myself at the edge of a vast, yawning abyss, a plummeting drop into darkness that made my stomach lurch. There was nowhere else to go. The canyon pinched out here, narrowing to a bottleneck with sheer walls on three sides. I had just enough time to comprehend the trap I'd blundered into before I heard a low, guttural growl behind me. I spun, pressing my back against the cliff edge to see the creature stalking out of the shadows on the far side of the gap. This close, I could see the grotesque blending of human and animal features, the vaguely anthropoid shape wrapped in a pelt of mangy fur, the long sinewy limbs ending in wickedly curved claws, the distorted face that was neither man nor beast, but some blasphemous hybrid of the two. But it was the eyes that held me transfixed, red and glowing like coals, a light with a malevolent awareness far greater than any animal intelligence. I saw my death reflected in those ember depths, the promise of slow, savage dismemberment of a screaming end in a place where no one would ever find my bones. The creature took a step forward, lips peeling back from jagged yellow fangs. A sound emerged from its throat, a grating, rasping approximation of human speech. Nowhere to run now. My mind reeled, unable to process the horror of what I was hearing. The thing could talk, it could reason, and it had chosen to hunt me, to torment me for its own twisted pleasure. Despair rose up to choke me. I was going to die here alone and unwanted, and my last sight on earth would be the face of an abomination gloating over my terror. But as I stood there, paralyzed by the enormity of my doom, something deep within me rebelled. If I was going to go out, it wouldn't be sniveling and begging. It would be on my feet fighting like my father had taught me. My hand closed around a fist-sized stone, the best weapon I could hope for. Fixing the creature with a defiant glare, I raised the rock over my head, putting every ounce of my strength behind my words. "Come on then, you son of a bitch. Let's finish this. For a long, breathless moment, the monster stared at me, its expression unreadable. Then, to my astonishment, it threw back its head and loosed a bark of laughter, a sound like bones splintering. Good. It rasped. More. Fun. This way. And with a roar that shook the stones beneath my feet, it charged. What followed was a blur of desperate, snarling violence. I remember striking at the creature with my poultry weapon, feeling ribs crack beneath the blows. I remember its claws raking my flesh, my blood mingling with the rain. I remember a vicious struggle at the very lip of the abyss, the ground crumbling away beneath our churning feet. And then, with a screech of rage and frustration, the creature lost its footing. For a single crystalline instant, our eyes locked. And in that shared gaze, I saw something flicker deeper than those infernal depths, something almost like respect. Then it was gone, tumbling away into the black maw of the canyon, its furious howls doppling into silence. I lay there in the mud and blood, more dead than alive, as the storm spent its fury overhead. Impossibly, I had survived. But as I dragged myself to my feet and began the long, limping journey out of that accursed place, I knew that some vital part of me had not. Something had broken inside, some fundamental faith in the order of things, leaving behind a howling void that could never be filled. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to make sense of what had happened, trying to fit it into some rational framework. But there was no sense to be made. The authorities searched the canyon, but found no sign of Orson or the creature. The case remains open to this day, another unsolved disappearance in the long history of the vanishing borderlands. I moved away not long after, unable to bear the sight of the red rock wilderness that had once been my solace. I drifted for a long time, a ghost in my own life, until I fetched up on the green, misty shores of the Pacific Northwest. I built a new existence there, as close to peace as I'll ever get. But not a single day goes by that I don't remember what dwells in the empty corners of the map. And sometimes, in the dark of the moon, when the wind keenly downs from the north, I fancy I can hear its howl still. A gliding, taunting reminder that the hunt is never truly over, that somewhere out there it remains, waiting for our paths to cross again, waiting to finish what we have started. In the hungry heart of the world,